Hello guys, how are you all? Welcome back to my channel. So, today we are gonna see, what if Naruto fell into a different world after a battle? Part 1. And subscribe if you enjoy the video. And also check the description. So let's begin the story. Another body washed against the shore. There was nothing remarkable about that. The currents around the Indus Cape were turbulent enough to merit a mention in the naval chart. Still, there was no end to overconfident crew. As Elder Minis clutched his walking staff tighter and began the slow descent from the cliffs to the shore, his thoughts drifted back to his career in the Navy. He was just a young lad back then, far too young to earn the title of Elder. Hot-blooded and thirsty for glory, he had sailed as a mercenary, and quickly earned a name amongst his fellow brothers. A name he had long since buried since his retirement. It wasn't until the bent and fragile man clutched his sheepskin cloak tighter around his body. The simple movement distracted him from his memories. It also shielded him from the morning winds. Now that Minis was closer to the shore, he could finally resolve more than just a feckless smudge. Eyes are getting weaker each winter. How long before Shiamon exacts his price? Though he was long retired from active service, the hardened elder made it his habit to stroll down the cool shores. Treasures always seemed to creep up when the tides were just receding. He wanted to be there in the morning, when the sun's solemn glow would announce yet another day of surprises. All manner of things would wash up to the shore, though Minis had to admit most of it was useless flotsam. An intact barrel or crate appeared once in a while, but its contents would often be fouled by the salty water. Still, even rusted iron had its uses, if nothing else but for scrap. Inevitably, bodies would show up. The elder had seen plenty of hapless sailors wash up on these shores, none of whom survived the ordeal. The only survivor he had encountered so far was a Bronze Praetorian, and his unconscious body wasn't a pleasant sight to anyone other than a guardian. Relations between the Octos and the Bronze were always testy, and Minis didn't want to risk incurring the wrath of one of the notorious Praetorians. So he had done what any other Octos citizen would have done. He'd gone scampering back to Ormuz as fast as his feeble legs could carry him and barged into the village leader's office. When Royals realized Minis wasn't lying, the leader immediately grasped the ruby medallion around his neck and spoke aloud. As soon as he had spoken his words, Royal's hand unclenched, revealing broken fragments of the ruby. The magical device had done its purpose in allowing the regional capital to be informed. The two old men calmly waited in a testy silence while the guardians took their time to fly to the village and retrieve the Praetorian. Minis hadn't heard a word about the foreigners since. Determined not to be surprised this time, the first thing Elder Minis did was look at the body's wrists. No bracers. Minis sighed in relief. Though the unconscious boy might still be a Bronze, it was unlikely the stranger would pose a threat to the village. Reassured, Minis poked the body with his staff once, then twice, but didn't observe a reaction. A corpse then. He turned the surprisingly heavy body around and came across a battered sight. The teenage boy, for he could scarcely see any signs of a stubble, was a bloody mess. The boy had definitely been in a fight, though Minis couldn't imagine any kind of opponent capable of inflicting such terrible wounds. There were massive bruises all over his strange body, and his foreign orange clothes were practically ripped to pieces. The myriad of scratch marks and bloody wounds were gruesome. Any doubt to whether this poor soul was dead disappeared. The poisonous seawater must have already seeped in his body and claimed his spirit as its own. Few were granted mercy from the heartless god of the seas. Morokos was all too ready to embrace another life. It was a complete surprise then that the body Minis had thought dead was coughing up water. HCH. The elder didn't blink a single time and lowered himself. The boy's head, whose forehead was covered by a strange band of engraved metal, was shaking frantically as seawater sprayed out. The elder's weak and wrinkled hands quickly came up to the boy's scarred chest before pushing down hard. A whole thrust of water escaped the boy's mouth. The coughs were weaker, and the boy breathed more easily now. Minis was stunned. Nobody escaped the clutches of Morocco, especially when one was so heavily afflicted. Either the boy was dumped somewhere close to the shore or... Minis' thoughts didn't stray any further. All he could think of was to drag the unconscious body further up the shore and get some help. He couldn't have known the legend he had uncovered from the shore. Naruto remembered little. Images flashed by of a battle of some sorts against Akatsuki. There was an ambush involved, but he didn't remember much of the details. Kakashi was with him, and he still remembered. Faced against such overwhelming odds, they made a fighting retreat while hoping reinforcements would come in time. Explosions and earth flung everywhere and about as they made their run. The further the battle went on, the more the details blurred. The recollections went from chaotic to patchy, with huge holes between each event. The last memory dealt with his Jounin sensei's Sharingan. A hole of purest inky black appeared for the tiniest of moments in front of Naruto. Kakashi's narrow focus didn't spot Naruto storming against the Akatsuki until it was far too late. Something important happened at that moment when his Rasengan collided with the growing void. An explosion of colors burst from the center as his chakra disintegrated. Screams, both Naruto's own and a far more ominous one, erupted as he hurled straight through a tunnel of blackness and stars. As he fell forwards towards an invisible destination, the blue and red chakra around him battled for dominance. For just a split second, the two warring sides suddenly mixed and turned purple before they separated in a violent explosion. Then nothing. The boy in the rough shed bed struggled with his half-dreamy state. Small groans escaped his lips as he tried to straighten out his thoughts. The throbs of pain did everything to prevent his efforts. Nothing except bandages and a thin linen blanket covered him from the world. He fell in and out of sleep for a period. At some times when he woke, his lips would brush against a clay cup full of a lukewarm and nasty-tasting liquid. As much as his throat recoiled, he knew that he was being nursed back to health. So he cooperated. If anyone wanted him dead, he would have been long ago. His whole head was bandaged off so he couldn't see who was tending him. Naruto still had his ears though, and it quickly became evident from the background noise that he was in a cottage. He knew it wasn't an apartment or a large mansion from the way the winds crept through the cracks of the walls. Another thing he noticed was that there were two people around most of the time. One was probably an old man, whose voice vaguely reminded Naruto of the third Hokage. The woman was probably the spouse of the old man. Both spoke to him gently but reserved, as if they were unsure of his intentions. The boy had no idea what they were talking about because he didn't recognize their alien language. Soon, thoughts of his current predicament began to dominate his thoughts in an ever-increasing intensity. He could tell that he was not in the land of fire anymore. The Hidden Leaf Village must be far from wherever he ended up. The crash of water told him that he was near a sea or an ocean, but there was no way he was in the land of waves. The air just smelled too differently. It wasn't as moist or sweet as the slightly tropical environment of his native lands. There was only one conclusion left. He wasn't in the elemental countries anymore. Desires of returning home burned strong in him. He had friends he needed to return to and a village he needed to protect. As soon as he was awake, he would gather up a wallop of chakra, try the Rasengan/Sharingan Thinji and do whatever was necessary to drag himself back to Konoha. Determined, Naruto focused inward and tried to call up the bastard fox to heal him faster. It was then that he found out that the familiar presence in his stomach was missing. It was as if a burning fire had left his body, leaving a gaping cold behind. "Kkyubi? Where are you?" He could hear the soft footsteps of the old woman coming to his side, probably surprised that he was conscious enough to speak. Naruto tried to focus his chakra to feel about his own body and find out where the damned fox was. Nothing. Any trace of demonic chakra was gone. Even worse, his chakra organs were scarred and horribly out of balance. He tried hard to get a grip on whatever was left of his chakra, only to feel the elusive energy slipping away from his attempts to tame it. The number one most surprising ninja received the most unpleasant surprise of all. He wasn't a ninja anymore. Naruto screamed at that moment. He screamed so hard, his throat practically burned out. He felt nothing more than agony, fear and despair. Everything that made him Naruto was gone, leaving behind a worthless deadbeat ex-ninja. Tears began to lead from his closed eyes, which stained the bandages wrapped around his head. The old woman sitting beside his bed invited the despairing young man in her embrace. The boy was wild and distraught, but she never flinched from him, having experienced much more hysterical people in her time as a medic's assistant. Minutes passed on while the sobs grew quieter. The shock of losing his power began to fade from his mind. There was nothing left. Naruto barely noticed he was being embraced. Sleep overcame him yet again. The next time he woke up, he noticed his vision was restored. At first, his eyes could sense nothing but blurry pastels of brown and yellow. Rubbing his eyes hard, Naruto quickly wiped away the muck and was finally able to see clearly. He could see he was in a cot unlike any other he had seen before, even stranger than the poor farming hovels in the elemental countries. Thick heavy spars made up the walls and barely kept out the chill. There was a single window with a single pane of malformed glass, which was too blurry to see through clearly. He lay on what could barely be called a bed. It was simply a collection of hay covered by a large sheet of hemp. The rest of the room seemed equally shabby. A few poorly hammered chairs, a small nightstand carrying a very old-fashioned oil lamp and more pieces of primitive devices scattered the room. Naruto knew for certain now that he was anywhere but home. Minutes passed by as his empty eyes stared out the window. It was a bit high, only meant to let in some light and keep out intruders. He could only view the temperate skies, drab and gray and so very different from Konoha's warmer climate. The distant crash of waves rang clearly in Naruto's ears if he concentrated enough. The water washing on the surf sounded even harsher compared to the gentle lapping of waves under the great Naruto Bridge. The seas beyond the coast must be vast. Could Konoha be somewhere beyond the waters? Was it simply a matter of sailing over that huge expanse of water? Or was his home in a different world altogether? This was too confusing for him. Some time passed by before the creaky door opened. A gray and wilting woman stepped in, being careful not to trip over the ledge. She wore a simple gray robe, reminding Naruto of a priest, but without the ornaments. Only a single pendant of bronze with a small white jewel adorned her neck. Her shoulder-length hair was loose except for a thick braid on the left side of her face. All in all, she might not look like anything much, but her smile told him all that was important. When she finally stepped closer, the woman began to look at her guest. Expecting him to be fully asleep and recovering from his wounds, instead she found him conscious and lucent. Her eyes went wide as she made a quick cry of surprise as she hurried over to check his temperature. The boy under her hissed immediately, but she calmed him with practiced ease. Naruto found her presence annoying. She reeked of someone who hadn't been in a bath for a week, but he wasn't stupid enough to interrupt her routine. As she finished, they both stared at each other for a moment. Finally, the woman brought up her gentle voice and began to ask, "May I ask who you are, young man?" The ninja's eyes widened as he heard the woman speak in a language so utterly different from his. It was yet another proof that he was somewhere else than home. "I can't understand anything that you're saying, old granny." It was the woman's turn to utter surprise. This blonde and blue-eyed looking young man did seem foreign, in a strange way a mix between the powerful barbarians to the north and the islanders to the east. But never could she imagine hearing an unfamiliar tongue. As a medic's assistant, she had traveled far and wide, assisting life guardians in their duties as they aided people from across the continent. The boy's words sounded similar to Koranian, but she knew enough of the language that the blonde-haired boy's speech differed far too much to be the same. After a few awkward moments, the woman simply pointed her palm at herself and stated, "Minessa." Could she be telling her name? Naruto thought, now in much less pain and more awake to think he had understood. They both didn't know each other's languages, so it was best to start from the beginning. He pointed to himself with a bold finger and smiled wide. "Naruto. Uzumaki Naruto." The woman smiled at the boy's liveliness, even if she could see that he wasn't quite honest with himself. She was quite confused by his name though. Again, it sounded vaguely Koranian. "Naruto? Son of Uzumaki? Naruto." "Ah, Naruto," Minessa tested. That was probably his granted name. Uzumaki might be his father's name, Tennis-sensei. Naruto shot back, grinning. He then pointed at himself and said, "Uzumaki Naruto." Making a confused face, he pointed at Minessa and asked, "Uzumaki?" It took only a few seconds to comprehend what Naruto was asking of her. He asked for her father's name. But wasn't it obvious she was old, and not of noble blood? Her gray hair and her elder medallion was enough to show she had grown out of her family. The state was her family now. Minessa simply shook her head and firmly replied, "No." "No." Naruto tentatively replied. He could tell that the word was a refusal of some sorts. Did she simply have no desire to tell him her name, Or did she not have a family name? All this business was very confusing for him. Manissa pitied the boy. He must have come from lands further beyond the continent of Tiradon. His hair and eyes seemed Velkish, but his compact body and speech was more Quranian. Any corner of the world might have such a strange combination of traits. There were the strange lands of Nider or Ovalconquer to the west of Tiradon, and the rumored continent of Nolander to the furthest reaches of the east. For all she knew, the stranger could even come from the mythical paradise to the south beyond the desert of Milar. Manissa was well aware that even in the fullness of her life, she had only visited a tiny fraction of the known world. The boy could come from anywhere. She understood that the boy must be having similar thoughts, and she gave her best smile to reassure him. Wherever he came from, he was still just a teenager. Besides, he looked nice with that large smile and bright eyes. She promised herself to take care of him the best she could. To distract him from his worries, Manissa began to teach him some words. She pointed at a chair and said chair. After a few hesitant replies from Naruto's mouth, she pointed at a lamp and said lamp. This continued for a while, and by the time her partner arrived home, Naruto managed to soak up 24 words. When Elder Mini stepped in the spare room, he expected to meet a dozing boy. Instead, he was met by a grinning blonde. The boy pointed rather obnoxiously at him and said, chair, lamp, window, bed, wall, floor, ceiling, blanket, pillow, stick, fire. The man simply blinked before he laughed. He could tell that the boy would bring a lot of energy in their solitary lives. The first months were difficult and slow for Naruto. Thoughts of going back home pervaded his mind constantly. Not far behind were dreams of getting back his strength. As soon as he was allowed to step outside, he often found a quiet place where he could try to bring out his powers. He tried to create a Kage Bunshin, then a Rasengan. In desperation, he even tried a simple henge or normal Bunshin. It didn't work. He simply couldn't push out enough chakra to accomplish the simplest of jutsus. Tree walking or water walking was out of the question, let alone infusing seals. Summoning didn't work out either. He had no way of knowing whether the contract was still active, and had no way of finding out. Was this what Rock Lee had to face every day? It took a few weeks for his loss to really sink in. The days of throwing flashy jutsus were gone, perhaps forever. No, why? Getting his inspiration from bushy eyebrows, Naruto started to emulate his friend. Naruto's usual taijutsu was reckless and sloppy, as he relied on either clones or his massive stamina. He couldn't afford to take such massive risks now that Kyuubi and his regular chakra were missing. If he focused deep enough, he could sense his chakra coils recovering. They were still large to be sure, but the chakra simply didn't replenish. His coils were like empty jars resting at the bottom of a dried-out waterfall, waiting for a single trickle of chakra to fall in its waiting maws. The absence of chakra meant that Naruto would have to hone his bear fighting skill. He lost all his kunai and shuriken on his journey, but made do with eating utensils to practice his accuracy. There weren't any partners to practice his taijutsu with, and he didn't want to scare off his caretakers, so he quietly sparred against the shadows. Even as he familiarized himself with the Octo's tongue and built his vocabulary, he couldn't carry a lengthy conversation with his two caretakers yet. Naruto first thought of the two as brother and sister from their similar names, but it turned out their names weren't given to them at birth. The women went into a long and confusing story about retirement of some sort where they would gain a new identity, but it went straight past him. He knew it was a big deal somehow, since he couldn't quite figure out how the both of them had enough money to live in sparse comfort. Sure, Minnie scavenged the beaches at dawn every day and joined an occasional hunting trip. Manissa often helped in the village and foraged for berries and herbs herself, but there was no way they could earn enough to bring in newly tailored clothes for him. The simple linen shirt and pants he wore barely kept out the cold at night, but compared to the rags the other peasants wore, it must have cost a good amount. The village of Oimos was a basic fishing and farming community. The central portion consisted of roughly 100 houses of varying shapes and sizes. Besides the village leader's estate, all the other houses were pretty small and simple rickety wooden buildings. Only the temple dedicated to Morokos of the Seas was made out of solid blocks of stone. Close by, there is a small pier further down the road towards the shore where fishermen would bring in their daily catch. Around the village, there were many farms in outlying directions, the furthest a half a day away by foot. Oymos was quite isolated from both land and sea. Rough currents made it dangerous for many traders to pass by. By land, the nearest settlement was 3 days away on foot, and it took a week on horseback to reach Cape Indus if the weather was good. One day, Naruto received a roughly sketched map from Ennis. While it was anything but accurate, it gave him a good idea on the shape of the Federation. It conveniently pointed out where Oymos was, and its place in the wider world. Gramps, this country, your country? What is the name? Minis smiled warmly and nodded. We are part of the city-state of Octos Indus, which is part of the Octos Federation. As you can see in the sketch, Indus is the largest and most strategically placed territory. Neighboring to the north is Cassadia, which is famed for their vast wealth and their highly disciplined armies. Minis began to lecture idly about all facets of his country. He pointed out that the Octos Federation consisted of 8 relatively diverse city-states. Bordering to the west was a vast mountainous region occupied by unruly tribal savages. A few hundred years ago, there were many wars between the Octos states as they vied for dominance. Only occasionally they would forget their rivalries and fight back the Mulads if they threatened to invade. Those times are long past now, and things are peaceful in this age. The Mulads are more preoccupied with the Delorian warlords further to the west. No, we face a far greater threat now. The most present danger to the Federation these days is the Brown Imperium. The old man pointed to the claw-shaped peninsula to the south. A thick body of water, the Karamat Sea, was all that stood in the way between the rivaling two nations. The Grand Imperium also bordered to the south of Milad, leaving the possibility of a land invasion as well. Minas went on about Hamd, a lone independent kingdom that bordered the Imperium to the east, which barely held back the Imperium's aggressive advances. He also briefly mentioned the enclave of Tyros, situated awkwardly in the middle of the Imperium but nonetheless able to defend their borders well with its prodigious numbers of guardians. He went on about other lands further away. Medes, Krasin, Solmondius, Korin, Dakrin, Velkan, Mbaran, Opaz, and Helosa. The names went in and out of Naruto's ears. It wasn't hard, since he couldn't understand half of what Minis was saying. He couldn't even read the characters on the crudely drawn map. No matter, he supposed, since none of the shapes remotely resembled the elemental countries. And it wasn't as if he would visit these far-off lands anytime soon. After the first few months, Minis was confident that Naruto was versed well enough in the language and the ways of the village to introduce him to the others. His first trip to Elders Akros and across a further down the isolated part of the village seemed like a new adventure. Akros was a huge man, even if he had lost half his muscles from age by now. Akrasa on the other hand was 3 heads smaller than her companion, which didn't seem to matter. It turned out that Minas and Akros were old war companions back when they were guardians. Their old war stories reminded Naruto somewhat of ninjas, but the two fought alongside large armies in coordinated action. Each guardian had an affinity towards a particular element. Minas used to harness the powers of water, which was one of the most valuable types in Octos, since they guarded the coast alongside the navy. Minas's element was life, although her elemental core was too weak to manifest, denying her from serving as a guardian. Akros was a powerful stone guardian in his day, protecting the border regions against Mulad incursions. Akrasa, a fierce fire guardian who fought by Akros' side early on in their careers. After the end of their active duty, Akros accompanied Minas when the latter wanted to settle in his native village. Though they somehow lost all their powers in some weird ritual Naruto didn't understand, it was evident that they weren't called elders for nothing. Each of the so-called exformed carefully showed their pendants to him, pointing out that the jewel in the middle corresponded to their element. Seeing as everyone but him had revealed their element, Naruto grinned and stated, "I'm wind element." At that, the 4 raised their eyebrows in surprise. After all, how could this seemingly innocent young boy have the powers of an Octos guardian or a Brown Praetorian? None of them had sensed any inkling of elemental forces from his body. As far as they were concerned, his energies were unformed and his core was undeveloped. The unformed differed from the formed, like Manissa, in that they could not hold on to any specific element. The formed on the other hand were fortunate enough to acquire a fixed elemental affinity, receiving minor benefits associated with the element. Only the informed were strong enough to manifest and control their element. This tiny remaining elite gained the title of Guardian or Praetorian after rigorous training, depending from where they hailed. Finally, the exformed were the ones who had passed on their powers to the benefit of their nation. All elders were informed. When they explained that Naruto was unformed, he didn't seem to get it. Inwardly though, Naruto understood their explanations, but was afraid that he wasn't exformed. It explained his loss of powers and the loss of Kyuubi. While he wasn't certain, he feverishly hoped it didn't happen to him. Naruto ate his dinner with a heavy stomach that night. Over the years, he had gotten used to mundane life under the care of Minis and Manisa. Naruto slowly let go of his desires to return to his home, and shifted his attention to more daily matters. It didn't mean he stopped caring about his friends, but he reasoned that if Kyuubi was out of Akatsuki's reach, then they would never be able to accomplish whatever they had planned with the Bija. Kyuubi's absence was a suitable parting gift. It was difficult for Naruto to adjust to a life of peace and quiet at first. Life was so simple in the little village. There were no ninjas and no battles. Some of the villagers had varying skill in combat, but they were more concerned with fishing, farming, or some other craft. The only one who seemed to be in charge of defense was a single army soldier, who acted as the local constable. One man was not enough to deter more than a single band of bandits, but the constable kept the peace amongst the unruly villagers. Other outposts and forts along the roads took care of most of the bandits before they strayed any nearer. Oimos may be an isolated rural village, it was not a lawless cove. Naruto didn't have much luck making any friends amongst the villagers, most of whom distrusted outsiders deeply. But he did manage to gain a few young friends. His very first friend was the local blacksmith's apprentice. He wasn't taller than Naruto, but he was almost twice as heavy. The formed boy had a very weak affinity for metal, but enough to be useful to the gruff and harsh blacksmith. Whenever he wasn't occupied with fixing horseshoes or farming tools, he'd join Naruto and go on an adventure in the forest. They first met in the forest, actually. Naruto wanted to make himself useful to the elders and resolved to hunt for rabbits or squirrels. The well-used eating knife was a poor replacement for a balanced kunai, but it would do for his purposes. In fact, it was a challenge Naruto had set upon himself to improve his accuracy. His lack of chakra made him nearly useless in every craft, so he was determined to improve his remaining talents to make himself useful. He didn't want to live on generosity forever. A man had to stand on his own 2 feet. One fine summer day, he stalked the forest, when a brown and furry animal scurried somewhere further off. He instinctively flashed his throwing arm, just moments away from flicking his wrist. "Wait, wait, wait!" A voice yelled in the same direction. Naruto's concentration was broken as the brown shape began to move and reveal itself. It was a thick furred boot. Naruto followed up the leg and ended up at a human face topped with a short black mop. The wary but innocent teenager smiled harmlessly at Naruto as he slowly stepped closer. Naruto kept a wary glance at the newcomer's sword arm, which currently held a crude but solid sword. They both took in their counterparts. Finally, the boy spoke up. "Hunting as well?" and pointed at the knife in Naruto's hand. "Yeah. Rabbits and squirrels." "You, dear, if they let me close." "Have they ever?" The boy shook his head and sighed. "Once, skitterbuggers they are." "And you? Are you hitting anything with that tiny thing?" Naruto turned red and stammered, "Yum. Maybe once or twice. I can help you straighten that out. I'm Ovro, son of Amos." "What's your name?" The ex-ninja couldn't help but smile back. Ovro was different from the other local boys and girls who liked to sneer at his supposed savagery. They soon began to meet each other more often. Ovro helped Naruto out by hammering out shuriken and a kunai from the materials Naruto bought with his allowance. In return, Naruto helped Ovro by teaching him how to use throwing weapons and letting his friends spar against him. The sparring sessions were interesting, to say the least. Naruto's taijutsu was crude and thoroughly unsuited to his current situation, while Ovro's style was more brawler-like than a proper discipline. Even though the bruises wouldn't go away as fast, Naruto still enjoyed polishing his skill against his heavier opponent, albeit one who was not trained in combat. They were soon joined by another regular companion. When Minis brought Naruto over to a village celebration dedicated to some god, he had a hard time fitting in with the celebrations. Not that it mattered which god was being worshipped on that day. No one seemed to engage the foreigner. The small group of children and teenagers all gathered in cliques of their own, having grown up together all their lives. Naruto searched for Oboro when he almost bumped into another solitary team. The newcomer's face was horribly scarred, to the point that one of his eyelids was permanently closed. His dark unruly hair was long, and could have covered his face when he wanted to. Now though, he purposely left it aside when he met Naruto's stare. His single green-orange eye met both of Naruto's blue ones. The boy curved his mangled face to smile. It came more as a half-twisted scowl. I am Micus, son of Miklin. You must be the washed-up one, Naruto, right? It's Naruto. Micus extended both his hands, palms up. Naruto hesitated for a second, but returned the formal Octo's greeting by extending his own arms, palms down, and covering Micus' hands with his own. When they pulled back their arms, Micus continued to speak in his distorted drawl. You must be wondering who I am, seeing you don't recognize the names. I'm the constable's son. This slim and wiry-looking boy is the constable's son. It all made sense to Naruto. The others probably thought the constable's son was an outsider, and stayed away from him. His mangled face probably had something to do with that as well. Naruto looked at Micus in a different light now. Even he knew how strict and harsh the constable was. He couldn't imagine living under such a father. It almost made him grateful that he had lived without any parents. They both started to make polite conversation. Naruto never asked how his face was disfigured. Micus never asked about Naruto's past. When Naruto tentatively revealed he was skilled in throwing weapons, Micus eagerly prodded him further. When he mentioned he was practicing with Oboro, Micus hesitantly asked if he could join. Naruto agreed, detecting no ill will from the only one willing to keep him company that night. Naruto could relate with Micus. He was probably the outcast of the village, the strange kid no one wanted to play with. It didn't differ that much from his former position in Konoha when he had an immortal demon in his belly. Indeed, at the end of the celebrations, Micus let out that he felt he was taking advantage of Naruto's ignorance. But Naruto countered that anyone who couldn't see the real him underneath probably wasn't worth his friendship. They both left with genuine smiles. The next morning, Naruto met Oboro at the usual spot at the edge of the forest. When Oboro wanted to go practice throwing at some rabbits, Naruto didn't immediately join him when he went further into the forest. When Oboro asked, Naruto simply told him to wait. It took a while before Micus came, seemingly clad for war in his leather armor. A sheathed bronze sword slapped against his hip. Oboro's pig iron sword was nothing compared to true craftsmanship. An unpleasant surprise ensued, and Oboro seemed terrified. It took some explaining to calm him down, and it took weeks for him to accept Micah's presence without objection. They still couldn't disregard the face, but they could get used to the sight. The three quickly became a regular feature in village life. Though Oboro was occupied as an apprentice, business was slow in the tiny village. Micus likewise had his own duties and often patrolled with his father, but he managed to scrounge up enough free time. They were all having a good time with each other. Many times they simply headed into the wilderness, intending to fish from a stream or construct an elaborate trap to capture deers. They also helped shape each other's fighting skills. Naruto's taijutsu became much less reckless as he started to learn to avoid the wounds he would usually sleep off in a day. Oboro got some discipline and technique hammered down from the others, and fought less like a drunken brawler and more like a sober brawler, though he was no match to his friends. Micus was the best fighter of the bunch. He was thoroughly drilled in the Octo's army fashion, though he was slow to adapt to the unorthodox tricks Oboro and especially Naruto could come up with that he hadn't seen before from his father. Oboro was quickly isolated from his old group of acquaintances. But he didn't mind, only saying, "They probably weren't true friends of mine to begin with if they're willing to turn their backs on me so soon." Naruto spent his days in peace and joy. All thoughts of constructing a raft and sailing the great blue expanse to the east were gone from his mind. He started to accept that he would never see his home again. Minis and Manissa were edging for Naruto to learn a trade so he could start earning a living by himself. It didn't take long for him to make a decision, considering his skill in throwing weapons. He would become a hunter. The local hunter was a sour-looking gruff with balding gray hair. He took one nasty look at Naruto and turned his back at him. "Wait, Hunter-san. Please let me be your apprentice." "Eh?" The man turned around and showed his nastiest scowl. Buzz off, I don't take no prentices. Got my arms full with the coming winter, and I don't need a lead-footed brat to scare off all the game. Naruto's fists clenched tight. He would show him. The next day he barged in the hunter's hut, and dropped 3 rabbit carcasses on the man's table, right next to his stew. The man took one good look at the bloodied red corpses before he whistled appreciatively. Good kills could fill many stomachs tonight. Maybe you could help me out after all. Next time try to hit him in the head, those pelts could be worth more than. Yaris, son of Krobel, was a veteran archer with a limp and constant pain from a badly healed arrow wound. He was formed with a moderate affinity for wood. Although he was impressed by the accuracy of Naruto's throw, his range and power couldn't compare to Yaris' composite bow. On a good day, Yaris could land a carefully aimed arrow in the middle of the animal's head thrice the range of Naruto's best throw, ensuring a killing blow. The hunter forced Naruto to pay for a cheap shortbow from the merchants, and taught him how to make his own arrows. The weapon was clunky and awkward in Naruto's hand, and his aim was atrocious. He could barely hit a rabbit at more than 10 paces away. Over time he improved, but it was obvious he had no talent with bows. Half of the time, Naruto simply threw a shuriken instead of troubling himself by scaring away prey. He'd be cuffed against his cheek for that, but Yaris didn't mind too much in general. He was hoping Naruto would get proficient eventually, and would appreciate the range and power advantage. Some animals were simply too tough to take down with a few cuts. Yaris' affinity to wood made Naruto's progress look sluggish, and the hunter frequently reminded his pupil of that fact. It didn't go very well on Naruto. Archery wasn't all that Yaris taught his new apprentice. There was so much more involved in hunting than simply killing their prey. There was the art of skinning, of prowling and stalking, of tracking, and dozens of other survival skills. Naruto learned how to handle a pack of wolves by being thrown right in the middle of it one night. He almost survived a bear charge by hitting its eyes with his shuriken before he dodged to the side. Naruto thought that Yaris' teachings were more extreme than any ninja training, but it sure beat lounging around all day. Yaris seemed to know exactly how much Naruto could take, and it was admittedly a lot. Some of the techniques and insights Yaris showed him were new to him. Even the things similar to his ninja teachings, which he previously ignored as boring, renewed his interest. If there was a problem in front of him, he'd simply fight his way out. Now, though, he needed to take advantage of every single trick to survive. He couldn't out-cubify himself out of trouble anymore. Slowly, Naruto began to learn the tricks of the trade. He could skin and gut a rabbit and string it in a sack in less than 5 minutes. He could hit a squirrel with his bow and arrow 30 paces away. He could sneak up to a wolf without alerting it when the wind was blowing the right way. Even Yaris was impressed with what he thought was just another foreign brat. He'd make a mighty fine hunter in a year or two of seasoning. Though I do wonder what he was previously trained in. He must have started out very young to have such skill. A year and a half from his first arrival in this new world, Naruto still wasn't accepted by the village's social circle. It wasn't as bad as his earlier days in Konoha. He still received polite nods, and the merchants would accept his coin without trying to demand an unfair premium. Still, he could feel the hesitance of a small village isolated from much of the world. The villagers simply didn't know what to make of a foreigner coming from lands they didn't even know about. It wasn't any ill will on their part, Naruto concluded, so he couldn't blame them. He'd accept the cold and stoic treatment without a peep and earn their trust the slow way. Naruto was carrying a small Orvan boar on his back as he made his way towards the small market in the center of the village. Commerce was slow on most days, and the market wasn't truly something special unless the monthly caravans brought their exotic goods such as jewelry and fruits. The prices were outrageous, naturally, but most of the villagers have never left Indus, let alone the village. Naruto shook his head. He never really had a use for such luxuries. He was saving his meager hunting profits to acquire a quality iron ingot the next time the merchants visited. Kami knew how he needed a tough and durable kunai. Overo's craftsmanship was improving over time, but he could only go so far with leftover pig iron and copper. It took all his strength to carry the heavy animal back to the village. The season was soft this year, or so the others claimed, but he was having plenty of trouble drudging through the snow. He was just about exhausted when he bumped against someone. Naruto let go of the carcass immediately, lest he would be crushed. He couldn't avoid falling onto the person he bumped though. They crashed together in a plume of spraying snow. Ouch, ouch, ouch. Get off me! Naruto was so tired that all he could do was breathe. You, don't get excited over me, you perv. Pain exploded when a knee smashed into Naruto's privates. He let out a peep in pain as he tried to soothe his private parts. Meanwhile, the girl underneath him wriggled her way out and stood before him as she brushed herself off from all the snow. Teaches you not to mess with girls. Naruto could sense the smirk behind the words without even looking at her face. When the pain finally got manageable, he opened them to see the most beautiful girl he had ever seen. There were plenty of homely women and girls in Oimos, but nobody could be called drop-dead gorgeous. The young lady in front of him was exquisite. She was moderately tall and with a slim figure that other farm girls envied. Her silky brown hair was long and completely smooth, which entranced his eyes. Her own large eyes were large, with a tiny slant that made her look exotic. Her dress was thick and white and decorated with gold-like patterns. A thick white woolen cloak was draped over her form to shield her from the cold. Who is she? Naruto wondered absently. I've never seen her before in the village. The girl merely sneered. You're the dork they fished out from the sea, right? Hey! Naruto growled back, snapping. Who are you calling a dork, fish eye? The girl scowled, and before he knew it, a heavy boot landed on his head. Ouch! Her footsteps left wisps of snow behind. Naruto couldn't help but stare at the first true beauty he had seen in this world. He briefly entertained thoughts of winning her heart, before realizing how hopeless he was. She doesn't like someone poor like me. I probably don't have a chance with her at all. Brushing himself off, the hunter in training continued to lug his heavy prize over to the local butcher. Naruto kicked the door in with his homemade leather boot and entered the warm shop, which reeked with blood and guts. Oi, hastos! I got a fat one right here, just in time for the Solos festival. A heavy-set voice behind the doorway quickly replied. Put M at the usual spot and AR2. LL be at Y in a moment. The figure that emerged from the open doorway was a heavy-set man. Naruto couldn't quite figure out if he was more muscle than fat. He also couldn't figure out how he'd got so big in the first place when he was just a small-time butcher in a tiny village. The man gave a cheeky smile at the boar on the table and rubbed his hands. A young one I see, but this one's got plenty o' fat left, and that fur will fetch a good price at the tanner's. LL give ye 2 gold for it all. No way, hastos. You're not going to rip me off again. Yaris told me a fat one like this would get him at least 5 gold at this time of year. The Chuju-like figure humphed and crossed his arms. Yeah, well, you threw your big fat knife in the neck, didn't ya? The cut there is all ruined and dirted, and the fur won't fetch good enough a price f me. LL be given it 3 gold pieces tops. Naruto bared his fangs and slammed his hand against the table. You'll give me 4 or else. Or else? Ha ha. What are gonna do? There's no other butcher in this town. LL be gentle with Y and give it 3 gold and 5 silver. That'll be the last offer. Fine. Naruto grumbled as he held out his hand, where Hasto's greasy fingers dropped the coins. He rubbed the coins against his wolfskin coat to get rid of the fat before putting it in a pouch in his coat pocket. 3 gold and a few silvers wasn't that much compared to the trouble and risks he had taken, and he had to pass half his earnings to Yaris. Enjoy the solos. Hasto's heavy voice called out as Naruto stormed his way out of the butcher's place. The familiar path took him straight to the edge of the village and the start of the forest. Still tired from his previous task, Naruto exhaled and dropped himself on a nearby frozen tree stump. As he looked back at the village, he thought of how much it felt like home. Granted, Oimos wasn't anything like Konoha with its luxuries like instant ramen. Life was harsh in this world, but somehow it humbled him. He wasn't an all-powerful ninja anymore, able to defeat Chunins and hold off Jounins. He is Naruto, the apprentice hunter now. Once he was proficient in the art of killing. Now, he was reduced to hunting. While some part of his mind chafed at the stepping down, the rest of him accepted the new reality as a fact. The Octo's army wouldn't accept a foreigner like him in their ranks. He wasn't even sure if he was able to kill others who he had no animosity over. Hunting animals was simpler and safer. It was a trade he could easily imagine growing old as, unlike the perilous path of a ninja. In time, Yaris would give him one final test, and if he managed to gain his approval, Naruto could proudly call himself a journeyman. Normally, an apprenticeship would last about 5 to 7 years. But many of Yaris' teachings overlapped with Naruto's ninja training, even if he never really paid too much attention in class. The game of stalking was not so different from tailing a target. After all, the only real knowledge Yaris had left to teach was on the behavior and habits of several dangerous animals not native to the Indus lands. There were giant birds, tigers, massive gray animals with horns, and more that hunted the lands beyond. The final test involved a month of traveling all the way to the edge of the Muled Mountains to hunt one of their elusive dangerous beasts. He was looking forward to that, and the independence he would finally achieve. He wouldn't have to rely on Minnie's generosity or pass on his earnings to Yaris. Soon enough Naruto could afford to have his own cottage built for him, and he'd be living in the village on his own. Perhaps he'd get lucky and find a girl to marry and move in with him. A cloud of frozen breath escaped his lips as his mind drifted to the shape of that beautiful brown-haired angel. "What's up, Naruto?" Overo's timbered voice called out as he muttered into view. His brown hide clothing was thick and padded even more than usual, since he couldn't stand the cold as well as the heat from a nearby forge. Just behind him was the ugly face of Micus. If it weren't for his visage, he'd look dashing in his black leather armor and thick black woolen cloak. Both of them were carrying their swords as usual. Naruto grinned and hopped off the tree stump. "Hey fellas." "I'm fine," he replied, and when both his friends extended one of their palms up, Naruto slapped them with his own like a horizontal high five. It was grossly offensive to slap a palm in Octo's custom, but that made it an even cheekier greeting. Naruto didn't care since it was all new to him, and the others did not feel the need to conform. "So what are we gonna do this time?" Micus drawled. He had lost a lot of his reserve over time as he got caught up with Naruto's enthusiasm for the strangest of things. His question was met with a foxy grin. "Hee hee. They say there's an old bear snatching Ikara's goats over by cliffs. Want to go check it out?" "Sure, as long as we don't let it get close." The three set out and trudged through the snowy path that led them closer towards the shore and its dangerous cliffs. It was a half-hour trip along a winding path between farming territories. The sky was clear that day, but the wind was howling harder the closer they got towards the coast. Micah's cloak kept flapping away from the violent gusts. "Hey guys," Naruto began, a bit hesitant, "have you seen this girl in the village lately?" "PFF, there's plenty o' the same wenches we see every day, Naruto," Micus replied. He then narrowed his good eye. "Don't tell me you have it for one of those witches?" "No," Naruto stammered back immediately, eyes wide. "It's just, there's this new one. Very slim, straight brown hair, big eyes, expensive clothes." A huge hand slapped Naruto's shoulder, almost bouldering him towards a tree. "Lysis, the princess. A real princess?" Naruto raised an eyebrow. "Course not, she's just the village leader's granddaughter," Micus answered back, his face bitter. "Looks like she's paying a visit to her grandfather to witness the solos here." Overo noticed Micus' mood and attempted to console him. "It won't be that bad. She's got to get back to her academia the next day. That's exactly what makes it worse," Micus complained. "You don't know how much I want to rip up her pretty face when we're at the big table having dinner. She's the village leader's granddaughter, while I'm the constable's son. There's no way I can shirk my place next to her. Every year she visits, it's always the same. Ugh, get your pig face out of my view. Or, you, there's pus coming out of that scar." Naruto couldn't believe what Micus was saying. Was this princess really so cruel? The observant Overo noticed Naruto's disbelief and added, "She's a city type through and through. There's nothing but bad business if she's interested in you. There's plenty of broken hearts back in the village. Anything else about her that's special?" There had to be more about her than having rich parents. "Yeah," his scared friend admitted. "She's a strong-formed. I know it sounds unbelievable, but her affinity's life. That makes her even more stuck up. But that means she's not informed, right? She can't be that special then, right?" It was peculiar that Naruto had never met an informed, those elite guardians with powers that sounded a lot like ninjutsu. Micus shook his head. "You don't know how rare and valuable the life-informed are. They're one of the few who are capable of true healing. The water-informed can take care of scratches and bruises, but life-informed can meld a chopped-off arm back to its owner. Life forms like Lysis act as an extra power source for them, since healing even a single serious wound can drain them quickly. Naruto listened in wonder. Informed could leech off chakra from formed. Something similar happened once in his career as a ninja, when he lent his chakra to bring a friend back to life. That these Octo's guardians perfected the trick and used it often was impressive. Naruto noted something else. It sounded like these life guardians could heal more effectively than the medic needs back home. The price for that seemed to be more energy. They finally reached the cliffs. The sight of those craggy rock formations always seemed to impress Naruto. There was power in their strength, and the realization that something even stronger had managed to carve them out. They each swept their gazes up and down the cliffs and the winding paths that traveled up and down the sides. "See any bears?" the anxious Naruto asked. "Do bears even hang out this far down the shore?" Yaris would have disapproved of trying to kill a grown bear with nothing but a sword or a kunai. But the three had some prior experience with other animals. They started hunting wolves at first, which was dangerous because they rarely traveled alone. More often than not, the three wouldn't find anything by the time they needed to return to do their chores. There had been a few times when they caught up with the elusive animals, and the fights were both exhilarating and dangerous. A wolf could bite you hard even through thick layers of leather. The risks were well worth it though, since the encounters quickly hardened Naruto's friends. Besides, the moment when things got lethal, Naruto could always incapacitate their prey with a few well-aimed shuriken he always held ready in his palm. They had recently decided to scout out real bears. While they hadn't actually found one yet, as bears usually roamed well inland, they didn't really care. "Look! I think I see something big and brown down there." Ovro pointed his finger at the end of a particularly notorious goat trail that ended at the bottom. Naruto could just figure out a tiny brown smudge before it turned around a corner near some rocky breakers. "Let's go," he said and grinned. None of them really knew what bears were doing down near an uninhabitable place next to a salty sea. But all they could think of was finding a real living bear. The trek down was dangerous. At some parts there wasn't even enough room for both feet. One misstep and you could drop straight down those deadly rocks that continually splashed against the waves. However, none of them were queasy, especially Naruto, who had once traveled through treetops with the ease of a squirrel. The snow was thinner at the bottom. The icy waves occasionally spilled against their feet. "Have you ever been down here before?" Naruto asked, eyeing the dangerous and slippery surface. "Nah, but we've been down elsewhere plenty of times during the winter," Micus replied. When they neared the outcrop of the tall formation that their target had passed, the three slowed to prepare themselves. Micus quietly unsheathed his finely tempered bronze blade. It was thick and broad, and fairly short for a one-handed sword. It was a military weapon, designed for slashing and chopping, but only as a backup since the standard foot soldier used spears. Ovro didn't have any fancy pommels or a fine scabbard, but he worked at his own blade for over a year now. The poor iron was hardened sufficiently to be able to withstand other hard weapons, and a cross guard was added later on to provide decent protection against crafty fighters. Naruto simply grabbed his bronze kunai from one pocket, and 3 shuriken from another. None of them intended to fight with their melee weapons, so it was up to Naruto to disable the animal if it charged on them. They slowly rounded the bend and came face to face with the most surprising sight in their lives. Instead of the massive bulk of a ferocious beast, they were faced with the massive bulk of a man. A heavy round wooden shield attached to the man's back was currently facing the three. The unknown warrior was working on something peculiar, something involving piling up branches. "He's making a fire? Out here at the edge of the coast?" More curious than afraid, Ovro tentatively asked the stranger, "May I ask what you are doing, great warrior?" He barely got off his question before Micah slapped his palm against the blacksmith apprentice's mouth. It was too late though. "Rum?" The massive thing rumbled, and turned to face the 3 youths. Seconds passed by as the fierce warrior sized up those who intruded upon him. Man's pure muscle. The thick furry bearskin hides couldn't hide the man's incredible physique. His face was a wild tangle of beard and hair, all blonde, but dirtier than Naruto's. His lips began to move, but all the 3 could hear was a rough babble. Sensing their confusion, the man stepped closer, frightening the boys. He took one arm to retrieve his shield from his back and strapped it against his forearm. The teenagers knew by then that they were in big trouble. The man growled as he took a one-handed battle axe from his hip. His eyes went excited as he screamed two simple words that struck fear into the boys' hearts. "Velk Magar, aye. He's a Velk," Micus exclaimed. "A barbarian. A raider or a mercenary maybe, but gods they never stray so far south. We've got to run, gods, a dumb blasted Velk," Ovro added in hysterically, and already turned back to run. The only one standing his ground was Naruto. He was confused by the sudden behavior of his two friends. "Are Velks always so feared? I heard about them before, but I thought they only raided villages along the Northeast Sea. The Octos Sea is too far south. Naruto, what are you doing standing there?" Micus called out, and beckoned Naruto to run back up the trail. "You've got to run back to the village and warn them." Anger crept under Naruto's skin. "I'm not going to run away from this guy. I've faced tougher people. Though he never really fought against someone this big without his ninjutsu. That didn't mean he was defenseless." He prepared his shuriken arm. "Why, you're crazy, watch." And with that Naruto swept his arm in an expert throw, unleashing the 3 shuriken he held just moments before. All 3 projectiles had hit the unsuspecting warrior. One dug itself deep against the heavy shield. Another went against his chest, but his coat was too thick and tough to penetrate. The final shuriken raked the man's right cheek as he flung back, drawing a deep line of blood, but otherwise enraging him even further. "Oh!" Naruto swiftly backpedaled and grabbed 3 more shuriken. As the bloodthirsty barbarian thundered closer, intent on plowing down the annoying blonde ninja, Naruto threw his next 3 shuriken. The warrior expertly lowered his head and hid himself behind his shield, which thunk 3 times against the impact of the small sharp objects. Before Naruto knew it, the massive man was right up his nose, and he struggled to lift his kunai in time to block the heavy chop of the barbarian's axe. The impact was heavy, and Naruto was utterly stunned as his knees collapsed. As the man lifted his axe again to deal the finishing blow, Naruto was calling up his ninja reflexes. He kicked against the man's shin, which evidently hurt the man, but not enough for him to stop what he was doing. Desperate in his eyes, Naruto did the last remaining action that could save him. He threw his kunai straight at the man's throat. Gah! The man's arm got in the way as he raised it to his face just in time. Naruto didn't waste a single moment, and jumped up to deliver a well-aimed uppercut, which cracked against the jaw. Both Naruto and the man buckled back from each other in pain. His fist hurt. At least he won enough time for Micus and Ovro to take over, and they went past Naruto to finish the barbarian. Ovro used his heavy arms to good and bashed Velk's shield with a large swing of his heavy sword. Micus passed Ovro from the left, and made a quick stab at the man's injured arm, cutting it and spilling a lot of blood. The Velk yelled again in his own language but was forced to drop his battle axe. Before Micus could deliver the coup de grace, the warrior bashed the edge of his shield down against the feet of both of his attackers, disorienting them. Having bought some time, the Velk retrieved the kunai buried in his arm and was about to stab them at Ovro. Naruto could see what was coming, but was too far away to stop it. He was all out of shuriken, and the only weapon he had left was a spare kunai. Both his friends were blocking his view, so he had no chance of injuring his opponent without risking his friends. If only my jutsus worked. If only I could do a substitution. The ninja closed his eyes and willed his empty reserves to gather enough strength to do that simple academy-level jutsu. Both his hands were clenched tight as he concentrated deep within his stomach where his chakra was supposed to gather. He practically squeezed his chakra coils to come up with the energy he needed. For the first time since he'd landed upon this world, he felt a familiar warmth that graced his coils and bloomed his hope. It was just a tiny sliver, a simple caress, but it was enough. Naruto put the handle of his kunai between his teeth, not trusting himself to have enough chakra or control to do a single hand seal. His hands quickly went through the familiar motions. Ram, boar, ox, dog, snake. Substitution jutsu. 2 puffs of smoke emerged. When the white puffs blew away, Ovro found himself surprised that he was suddenly standing away from the menacing death stroke that was sure to strike his head. When he looked in front of him, He noticed that somehow, Naruto had taken his place. His eyes went wide as he saw the Velk's downward slash being blocked by Naruto's mouth. The blonde quickly slammed his palm against the middle of the Velk's chest, knocking out the huge man's breath. Naruto didn't pause and quickly lashed out his boot against the man's shield. The impact was strong enough for him to drop Naruto's kunai. A final kick sent the barbarian flying backwards, something Ovro found impossible. How could a thin squirt like Naruto knock back someone twice or thrice his weight? Micus! Naruto yelled. His friend got the picture and quickly approached the fallen warrior. His buckled knee crushed against the Velk's chest as he pinned the warrior down. Without another word, Micus stabbed his sword in the man's exposed neck, instantly taking away the warrior's life. For a time, nobody moved as the tides crashed against the rocks. Everyone was shocked as they tried to catch their breaths and process what happened. Naruto's thoughts strayed towards his re-emerging powers. If he could manage a Kawarini, he might be able to do more later on. How long would it take for him to make a shadow clone? Was this the start of his recovery? Hope welled inside his heart. Ovro was simply stunned. How in the hell did his friend? He was pretty sure that the elders proclaimed him unformed. Did they make a mistake? Ovro was yet again reminded that he knew absolutely nothing of Naruto's origin. In their time as friends, Naruto had never uttered a single word about his capabilities. How much more was Naruto hiding from him? Had Naruto deceived all of them from the very beginning? Micus had not missed the amazing stunt Naruto had pulled off, but his mind refused to stray from what he had just done with his sword. He, Micus, Terraface of Oimos, disappointment to his father, had just killed one of the ferocious Velk. Admittedly, he had help, but it was rumored that a single Velk could best 5 regular soldiers. That only 3 half-trained youths had managed to defeat such a fearsome dread made his pride shoot up his throat. Eventually, Ovro was the first one to snap out of the spell. Guys, what did we just do? Micus started. We just killed one of the terrors of the north? Yeah, but Naruto. Ovro turned to his friend, afraid but awed at the same time. You did something, didn't you? Don't tell me you're a hidden Praetorian. Wait, guys. You have it all wrong. Naruto quickly lowered his kunai and calmly waved Ovro to listen. Micus looked at him in suspicion, but he wasn't as fearful as Ovro. Not exactly knowing how to proceed, he started. I'm not from the Imperium, okay? It's just, before I washed up here, I was something. Something? Ovro didn't quite look convinced it was safe, but he started to lower his weapon. A kind of guardian or Praetorian. But different. We had powers, but they worked differently. And one of those powers is you go poof and we're taking each other's places? Yes, Ovro. They all stayed silent after that. Micus looked thoughtful, and asked, You're not a rogue, are you? You're definitely older than 11. Are you hunted? Faye. Naruto spat. I wish I was hunted. I'd be valuable enough that someone would drag me back home. It's different in our place. I think I'd be called a missing name, but... Naruto paused to see if his friends would react to the term, but they didn't. I already told you my home is far away. There's no chance someone would come after me, but why hide your powers up to now? I can understand that you don't want to be hunted down by the Guardians, but we're your friends. Micus remarked while he cleaned the blood from his blade before putting it back in its scabbard. I didn't know I had any powers left. When the elders said I was unformed, I thought I had lost my powers forever. Like the exformed. My core, as you say it, didn't recharge. I thought it was permanent. It was until now that I found out that. Perhaps I was still informed after all. But Ovro began, but Naruto held out his hand to silence him. Please, no more questions, okay? I have to figure out all of this myself before I can tell you more. Friends. Relieved that he wouldn't have to explain everything, Naruto turned to look at the corpse. Let's look at his belongings and find out why he's here. The trio got into the business of checking out the man's equipment, while Naruto was retrieving his shuriken and kunai. There wasn't much on the unknown Velk besides his thick garments and his equipment. There was food and water for a day, and some flint and tinder to spark a fire. Who the hell would want to spend the night out here in the cold near the sea? Ovro commented, shaking his arms against his body. It's freezing out here, especially with these winds. It's much better to spend the night in the woods up above. Micus narrowed his eyes. How did Velk get here in the first place? And why did he only bring enough rations for just a single day? Velks travel by ships, Ovro commented. The constable's son ran the facts through his mind, as he was trained to. He finally came across an idea. Velks never travel alone, even as mercenaries. This guy was up to something here, and he pointed at the bundle of wood nearby. I think that fire wasn't only meant to warm him up. It's to signal his friends. Both Naruto and Ovro's eyes widened. A raid? An attack? During solos? Ovro stammered. PSH. Micah spat into the sea. Now that he noticed, this was a good place to make landfall well out of sight of the village. Unlikely, dangerous even, but in the realm of possibility. Those heretics don't even celebrate solos. Only the Velks would actually dare to attempt such. The situation finally sunk in their minds. We have to warn the village, Naruto decided. They won't believe us. Velks never go this far down south. Ovros replied. Then we just have to bring proof. The energetic boy pointed eagerly at the heavy corpse. There's no way we can lift something that heavy up the dangerous path. Even though I'm not strong enough to do that. That was easy to solve in Naruto's eyes. He wordlessly approached the dead body and picked up the man's discarded battle axe. It was heavy and clumsy in his hands, but it would do. He carefully lifted the weapon over his head before bringing it down in a heavy chop. A hairy, bearded head rolled away. Ovro and Micus were speechless. Ovro, please take this axe. You'll have to bring it with us. When Ovro hesitated, Naruto simply pushed it in his hands. Don't drop it. Naruto went back to the corpse and pried away the straps holding the round shield on the headless corpse's forearm. This is for you to carry, he said, and Micus wordlessly took it over, unable to tear his gaze away from the headless body. When Naruto grasped the hair of the head to lift it up, Ovro had the strongest desire to empty the contents of his stomach in the water. Blood continued to seep down from the severed neck like a twisted creek. What are we all waiting for? The village needs to be warned. Let's go. Naruto led the way back up the trail, hoping that nothing would ruin the peace that reigned what had been his home for the last 1.5 years. He might not be a native to these lands, but even he could recognize that the warrior was just a prelude to the chaos that would follow. Oimo's might not be his home, but he was damned if he would let Minis or Manissa suffer from the ravages of war yet again. It was his ninja code. The sea was stirring under the weight of the galley as the sleek and sturdy vessel prowled the blackness of night. Nothing penetrated the air except the roar of the waves and the rhythmic crash of oars that struggled to push the ship forward. The ship was nameless, as were all their people's ships. His people did not believe in the silly notion that ships had a name or personality. The wooden contraptions were merely just a means to travel over the great expanse. The warrior looked over to the port side of the ship, seeing with his very eyes the imposing row of oars moving in unison. Just 15 aside, not as impressive as the warships of his warlord's fleet, but the warriors it carried had enough means to terrorize an entire region. The warrior in question was one of the finest of the north. His village lay far up in the north, on the east side of the dreaded lands of the Velk. Though his people claimed the icy and rocky peninsula, they did not truly rule over it. Such petty notions were meaningless when it concerned the Velks. No, the ones who truly ruled the lands of the Velk were the dreaded terrors of the icy night. The massive black WYRMS of the Garu who swept from the height of their nest to terrorize and devour the humans who dared settle in their lands. The giant earth slugs of the craggy forest, a cursed place for even the most rugged Velks, often left the unfrozen region to toy with unsuspecting Velks with their half-frozen acid slime. Velks did not cower easily before the dangers of these sacred lands. Since the time of Markran and the cruel exile, they have come to embrace the frozen wastelands and its many dangers. Weaker humans might have perished quickly, but the Velks persevered. Only his people dared to enter the craggy forest to steal its precious delights such as moonberries and slime apples. Their people's brute strength and their mastery over combat have helped them endure the terrors when the terrible beasts came to amuse themselves. Many horrors have been bested by the Velks, granting them almost complete mastery over the barren Velkish Isles. The head warrior turned to his companion and asked a question. Is the time approaching, shaman? Shamans were the first to sanctify any major kill, and were the few who were able to withstand the biting acid slime of the earth's slug or the burning blood of a blackworm. The particular shaman before him now chose to drape his head with the skinned-out pelt of a werewolf. The shorter Velk was amply kept warm in layers and layers of pelts. The warrior could barely recognize their origins. There was the black of a werewolf, the striped gray of the Rillick bear, and the dried husk of an earth slug. Werewolf shamans always had an uncanny ability to sniff out their prey. They often lowered themselves to all fours as they held their nose to the ground. They were capable of other feats as well. No shade was safe in their presence, for they could take command of a person's own shadow and will it to spy its own master. They could call upon the power of the sky to release a thunderbolt on an unsuspecting victim. However, their most potent power was the common ability of all shamans, transformation. With nothing more than a thought, his shaman could transform into a grotesque parody of a werewolf, with all the distinguishing features of the shaman's other animal hides. He was not particularly keen to witness his shaman's transformation. The shaman began to speak. Time. Time. Does the blackworm take any notice of time? They swoop upon their prey during the blackest of night as well as the brightest of noon. Typical. Shaman Iker, do I need to repeat myself? The Velk put his massive hand over the handle of his father's war axe. Shamans never learned their place in Velk society. In more ancient times, the shamans were all that held the Velks alive against the onslaught of the terrors. Patience, head warrior deck. The stars, the shaman traced his clawed arm towards the night sky, are unfathomable tonight. They reveal little secrets, for that is what stars do. I am powerless in their might. You speak nonsense. Rick never had any patience for these sorceries. He'd rather just rely on his war brothers to plunder the unsuspecting villages along the coast. It worked in his forefathers' time, so it should be no different this time. These southerners were even weaker than their usual prey, not even guarding their villages properly. They were unworthy in Rick's eyes, not even deserving to exist. Soft creatures they are, wretched in their own weakness, and wasting the precious lands for their own squander. The Octos were far weaker than those who cowered behind the barbed coasts of Varan, Opaz and Helosur. The lands of their traditional victims were so deliciously close to Velk that they frequently suffered under his people's might. Their prey hardened over time, matching Velk ferocity with their own. However, no matter how strong their dedication, it could never compare to the hellish circumstances in the territories of the Velk. The cold was ever present, and so were many other dangers. Those who conquered and thrived in those inhospitable regions could vanquish everything else. Crushing these complacent southern Octos was child's play. I think, the shaman finally said, the next village shall provide some challenge. Rick lifted his eyebrow, unseen in the darkness. Do the stars say so as well? The shaman turned to face the head warrior. The powerful sage of all matters spiritual shook his head. It is not the stars. Rather, he could grasp the bone medallion under his neck. It was the skull of a baby Nygar, one of the terrors of the caves. It pulses within my very being. The air is stirring of what is to come. Can you divine anything more than that? The eyes of the werewolf pelt seemed to glow under the starlight. Only death, the songs of the fox, scroll of the first wind, solos at dawn, climbing up the trail was tiring. Naruto, fit as he was, still lost most of his stamina when Kyuubi was ripped away from him. At least he could shrug off the cold with his thick clothes. His winter tunic was double-layered, with an inner layer of linen and an outer layer of leather. His wolf fur coat kept him protected from the worst of chilly winds. That the coat was made from his own hand gave an extra boost of warmth. Compared to the other unskilled laborers in the village, Naruto was a lucky man. He had carved a living in this primitive and unsophisticated world with nothing but the remnants of his once vast talents. He was so content in his new life that he couldn't imagine anything else than to earn his living by hunting game. Being a ninja was stressful and exceedingly dangerous. He had never thought to resume his former profession and kill another person. Naruto knew very well that the countries of this world often went to war, but he had always assumed that the ravages of war were many leagues away. It was impossible to imagine that Ormuz, a tiny and insignificant village along a turbulent and unimportant coast, would ever be targeted. There was no wealth to be gained from raiding the village. Only royals lived in comfort. but that was mostly due to huge retirement funds that the village leader was able to live in sparse luxury in an otherwise barren village. Most of the villagers were simple farmers, only harvesting enough to pay the taxes, feed themselves, and keep a small portion to trade a few essentials with the merchants. That idyllic pattern would be shattered now. The village was facing a mounting danger, and if his suspicions were correct, the attack would take place during the Solos festival. The Solos was the most important celebration in continental Terran, and practically every civilized nation paused in their conflicts to pay tribute to Solaris, the most important of the 8 gods. Naruto had seen the event only once, when he was still learning the language. The feast began at midnight in the Great Hall, which continued as ale and wine would be consumed well until dawn. Naruto struggled to stay awake and coherent during the entire feast as he chugged enough alcohol to keep himself warm. Those who managed to hold their drink and stay awake long enough would be fortunate enough to witness the spectacle at dawn. At the first speck of light, everyone would stream out the hall and gather at the central plaza before the temple. The local priest would then direct the flock to face the emerging sun. For 3 days past, the sun had dipped to its lowest level on the horizon. The 4th marked the period when Solaris of the sun would gain the upper hand on Shiamon of the shadows. The most important moment came when the circle of the sun would ascend beyond the horizon. The moment the bottom of that orange circle wrenched free from the earth, the sun would flash for a tiny second. That single blinding flash was all important, for it indicated the coming year's dominant element. At the start of this year, the sun flashed blue, the color of water. Every water guardian received a surge of power, as well as enhanced control over their element. The most powerful water guardians were able to conjure massive feats that were impossible to achieve in any other year. Naruto had heard from passing merchants that they took full advantage of their enhancements, and kept the Karamatsi wild and unpredictable to keep the brown triremes at bay. That was why the next Solos was so important. Many were hoping Solaris would choose to grace the water element for another year. Repeats had happened before in the past. However, the gods were unpredictable, and it was more likely that a different element would be chosen. Though water was the most desired element for the Octos, it was not as if the other elements could keep the Imperials off as well. The mighty wind guardians could call upon powerful storms and gales. Fire guardians carried by wind guardians were the bane of every wooden vessel. Stone guardians could conjure rock spikes from the bottom of a shallow sea to impale any craft. It was not as if Octos was defenseless in those cases. Such matters didn't concern Naruto much at the moment. It was more important to bring the Elk's head back to Oimos and warn the villages of the impending raid. He hoped that Royals would see that the threat was severe enough to avoid drinking themselves to a stupor during Solos. Most of the villagers have never been trained to fight, but if warned, they might stand a chance of holding off a complete surprise. Naruto knew that some of them were good brawlers, and others had some experience in the army, but that did not reassure him too much. If the other Velks were anything like the one he had killed, even a small raiding party could massacre all the men in the village before anyone could even raise a fist. That left all the women and children, and though he didn't particularly care for any of them, he was not about to let an atrocity happen. Micus, Ovro started. Do you think your father will be convinced? The thin and wiry teenager gazed his healthy eye at the severed head Naruto was holding by the hairs, his other eye obscured behind the mass of ugly scars. Micus clutched his black woolen cloak tighter around himself, as he struggled to keep the large round shield straight. This shield's Velk alright. Do you see the buckle in the middle? Micus pointed out. It's a blackworm's head. Walks like to bash its jaws against other people's heads, digging into your skull and clawing away bits of your brain. Ovro looked sick and turned away. Noticing his ill ease, Naruto asked, What about the axe, Ovro? Can Timos recognize it's a Velk weapon? The blacksmith in training seemed hesitant, but inspected the heavy weapon in his hands. It doesn't have any markings, but the hilt is probably wrapped in the leather of some beast of the north. The axe might be made out of blue iron, but I've never seen it before, so I wouldn't know. Micus added, My father told me that only the Velks and the other northern barbarians used double-bladed axes in battle. That must count for something. He then pointed to the severed head. Octos and Braun don't wear any beards, and they don't braid their hairs in that way. It sounded perfectly logical to Naruto, but he could sense an undercurrent of doubt. But you all think they might not believe us? Ovro shook his head. but kept silent. Naruto shared his sentiment. He dearly hoped the village leader would see the necessity and prepare the village for an attack. He took the last step up the trail and finally reached the top of the cliffs. It would take a while to reach the village. Naruto looked at the setting sun beyond the forest and sighed. He hoped he would be back before midnight. Their welcome had been less than enthusiastic. With nothing in their minds but the coming festival, the sight of a severed head brutally frightened the villagers. Royals, the village leader, and Miklin, the constable, quickly ushered the pair into the constable's office. The other four elders, Minis and Manissa, as well as Akros and Akrasa were present as soon as they heard. "What is the meaning of this?" Royals demanded, furiously pointing at the now frozen head. It's a Velk." Micus replied, more afraid of the stern gaze of his father than the sight of an angry Royals. Miklin approached the table and grabbed the head, turning it around in several angles. Thick broad nose, sunken eyes, blonde hair. Looks Velk, but might as well be a Tlar or a Parasan. If those braids weren't there, it might even be an Octos. You mean to say that the children might have braided their hair themselves? To cover up their murder? Royal's accusation took the children by surprise. Did he actually believe they would do something so stupid? Micah's father only snarled a little. Might be. Overo quivered his lips, but began to point out, but look at the axe. It's a Velk weapon. Isn't it obvious? Simple imitation. The gentleman might intend to frighten bandits. Royals replied, waving his hand in an absent wave. What about the shield? Micus asked. You suppose the buckle is supposed to be a black worm? It's nothing but a wolf's head to me. Akros began to speak his doubts, his face obviously troubled. If this gentleman is as big as a Velk, grows a beard like a Velk, wields a Velk axe, carries a Velk shield, why are you denying to yourself that it is a Velk? Royal's eyes flared up and grasped his red ruby medallion. Are you questioning my competence, Elder Akros? The former stone guardian didn't back down. You haven't answered my question. Why are you insisting that it is not a Velk? It's impossible for him to be a Velk. Seeing the doubt remaining on all four elders, Royals finally conceded a little. Oh, alright, he might be a bandit, or may have attacked the three kids as a mistake, I'll give you all that. The village leader then banged the table with his palm. But I will not tolerate any murder under my watch. I have served this village for 10 years and never in my tenure have I ever dealt with adventurous teenagers. He pointed a fat finger at Naruto, supposedly hunting for bears but managing to come across a long walk this far south. Everyone knows Velks don't travel alone. That is exactly why it's so important to warn the village. Naruto spoke up, no longer able to sit quietly and let this old bastard boss over him. There's no reason he's down at the cliffs making a fire except to signal others. You have to stop the festival and prepare defenses. Do not presume to order me. Royals answered in an arrogant posture. It is every village leader's duty to assure the Solos festival will be celebrated without any problems. I will not let some cheeky youngsters like you scare us all into abandoning our most holy day for a simple prank. It's not a prank, Naruto replied, fuming with anger. For a supposed retired merchant prince, Royals seemed awfully thick. How could he be so callous and discounting potential dangers to his subjects? Father, Micus broke out. Don't you believe me? You know I have no reason to lie. The stare Micus received chilled Naruto's spine. How could anyone look so heartless in front of his own son? I believe only that I have been negligent in my duty as a parent in preventing his wayward son from committing banditry to prove himself. Naruto's jaw dropped. He had never imagined such a thing would be possible. The one charged to protect their village didn't believe their warnings at all just because he hated his own son? Now wait here. Tennis interrupted. You know as well as I do that these three are incapable of murder. When they say they've encountered this walk down the Karas cliffs, I believe them. Silence, old man. The blatant lack of respect was staggering to the elders. They had never seen Royals so agitated. Miklin put a hand on Royals' shoulder. We should finish this business quickly. The feast is about to begin. Yes, Miklin, I know. Sharp blue eyes pierced the teenagers. It's the cells for you three, until I can find out myself what has happened to this gentleman. Good Solos. He tossed a final look at the severed head before he turned around to pick up his cloak and leave. The constable stared at the three teenagers for a moment, before demanding, "Leave your weapons here." "You heard Royos, it's the cells for you three." "But it's the solos," Ovro cried. "You can't put us in jail today." "Oh yes I can and I will. Now hurry up, brats." Micklin then pointed at Naruto. "And don't think you can hide any of those throwing things from me. I'll be patting you to make sure you've left out all of them." While they were removing their weapons, Naruto looked at Myers in a hopeful gaze. "You believe us, right?" "Yes, Naruto, I believe you." As crazy as it sounds, Akros looked critically at his old friend. "The village leader does have a point, despite my doubts. Nothing can be allowed to disrupt the festival. And Velks never come this far south to raid. It's unheard of." "But what about the head?" Manissa asked, while she examined it closer. "It may be Velk, or it may not be, but it is possible. Regardless of that, should we not guard against the most unlikeliest of happenings?" Akros retorted and missed the festival? "It is forbidden." "What's so important about this festival?" Naruto exclaimed, surprising all of the elders. "You guys are all old now, right? How many have you seen?" 50? 61. Minis replied. "Then I don't think that big fat Solaris would mind if you miss one out if it can avert disaster." The remaining elder, Akrasa, seemed thoughtful. "He does bring an interesting argument. We have served Octos and the gods for many years. I doubt we would lose favor in the gods' eyes. And chase this unlikely story? Please," Naruto begged. "Just promise me you'll guard the village during the solos." "I can't promise you anything," Minis replied, head down. It sounds too out of place. Indus has never suffered from Velk raids, nor from any other attacks. Seeing Naruto's clear blue eyes, he couldn't help but relent. "However, for this one time, I will do what I can. Thanks." Naruto smiled. For the first time this day, the constable finally cut the conversation short. "I will have to ask you all to leave now, elders." The elders all left while the three finished putting their weapons on the table. 2 swords, 2 kunai, and a pouch full of shuriken. Micklin patted all 3 of them to make sure they weren't hiding any weapons. He even inspected their boots. When he was finished, he led them to the room beyond. Heavy stones on all 3 sides boxed the cell room. Thick, heavy metal bars closed the remaining side. The wall behind was sparse, with nothing but a small high window to let in some light and air. Micklin pushed his key in the lock and opened the cell door, and ushered the 3 in before locking it in place. Satisfied that the brats were harmless, Micklin left the room and closed the door. They could hear the Solos festival starting in the distance. Ovro tapped his forehead against the icy cold wall. There was no heating in the cell, but they were allowed to keep their warm clothes. Still, the cold was a poor companion. As he shook his body, his mind began to draw to his fears. Ovro wasn't known as a brave boy. His entire life was dominated by farming and blacksmithing. Sure, he had fought a few wolves over the last year, but Naruto and Mikas did most of the harder work. There was no way he had imagined he would ever have to fight against the Velk. What was worse was that he was all out of weapons and trapped in a cell. The Velks could burn down the entire building and there was nothing he could do. Micah stayed calm. While his black leather didn't keep out the cold very much, his thick woolen cloak kept him from shivering. He should have known his father would pull off such a stunt, siding with the crazy village leader instead of trusting the word of his son. Now that he thought of it, it wasn't such a big surprise at all. He should have known his father would be blind in his hatred and come up with a plan beforehand. It was his fault that they openly walked into the village and let every little kid get scared by the elk's head. They were stuck in a cell and he was certain the heretics would raid them at a time when the entire village was at its most vulnerable. Perhaps he truly was the failure his father always hammered into his skull. Naruto could barely see any color. Everything was in shades of gray. He looked at his powerless friends in frustration. The village was about to be attacked, and what did the villagers do? They were drinking themselves stupid. The only ones who would still be awake by the crack of dawn would be a sleepy priest and an army of drunken villagers. They'd be no match to even a single Velk. Faced with possible danger, Naruto turned to himself and tried to call out his chakra. Sitting cross-legged with his back against the wall, he concentrated on his inner strength. He knew the chakra was there. It was just hiding somewhere. If he could manage a substitution jutsu, then he could surely manage something stronger. Naruto, is it working? Ovro nervously asked. The cold was getting to him. NGH. Not quite yet. And even if I could squeeze out some chakra, I don't have any techniques that are useful enough to break us out. Can't you do that transportation thing with objects, as well as living persons? I can, but even if we throw a cloak on the other side of the bars, it won't allow me to substitute with it. You can't use it to bypass barriers. Do you have another power that might be of use? I already told you I can't. There's the clone jutsu. But it would only be an illusion. There's also the illusion jutsu, but with nobody here a disguise is pointless. If you scream loud enough, they might hear you over the shouts and celebrations. Ovro quipped. Naruto only sighed, and relaxed his posture. If only I had more chakra. This chakra, Micus dwelled, his eyes staring calculatingly at Naruto. It's the source of power for your strange techniques, am I correct? If you had enough energy, would you be able to do something to break us out? Yes, I could. The most efficient technique would be... Naruto scratched his head. I never usually paid attention to the drain of my jutsus, since I usually had plenty of chakra. But now... Ah, the ninja remembered. An explosive tag would be enough to blast open the lock. An explosive tag? Micus raised his eyebrow. Yeah, it's a paper note containing the energy of an explosion. If I let it off, it will go boom, depending on the energy it contains. Do you have enough energy to make one? Naruto sighed. We don't have any paper here, do we? Nor do we have any ink to make the seal. And I don't have nearly enough chakra to break open that lock. He grasped his hair and tore at it. Ah, if only I was stronger. Naruto, Micah started, with an idea in mind. What's your affinity? Naruto stopped pulling his hair and began to think. It doesn't work that way for ninjas. We don't form our chakra in an element when it's stored in our chakra coils. It's just raw chakra. We add an element only after it's expelled, and many techniques don't even use elements. So does that mean that you can imbue any element in your core? You don't have an affinity for any specific element? We do have affinities of some sort. Naruto dusted off his memories. It's not exclusive like the way it is with guardians. It's more of a natural inclination. I'm a wind type, but I can do some other techniques as well, just not as good and definitely not within a lifetime of training. Naruto never really used those other techniques, since the practice required in mastering them took ages. If his chakra coils didn't start to produce chakra faster, then he might have to revise that opinion. He needed to master more chakra-efficient techniques. I think I get it, Micah said, and stood up in the darkness of the cell. Both Naruto and Ovro knew he had a plan. He always had a plan. Naruto is like an unformed informed. Huh? Unformed informed? Ovro asked, utterly confused. Micah smirked in the darkness. You could also say it's an informed without an affinity. His core is strong enough to manifest its energy, but he can choose which element he wants to expend it. Ovro, you're a metal formed, correct? Perhaps you can act as a battery for Naruto. But it's weak. Too weak to act as a battery. Nonsense, Micus replied. We all know a strong form like Lysis can provide enough energy for a life guardian to heal half a dozen critically wounded people. Weak formed like you may just have enough energy for Naruto to produce one of these explosive tags. The lanky teenager then turned to Naruto. And I'll offer my own unformed energy to make sure you have enough of this chakra. But I don't even know how to use your energies. And even if it works, I don't know how much chakra you guys can give me. Even if this crazy stunt somehow works, your energy might be poison to my body, or I might drain your life away or something. If that is the risk, then we'll take it, Micus boldly stated while he eyed Ovro with his lone eye. Though not at ease with the risks, the boy nodded with reservation. Naruto knew they were serious. He didn't know how the chakra transfer would work in this world, but he would have to see when it happens. All he needed now was a paper and some ink to write the tag. Though, did he actually need paper? Would something else be enough, for example, a piece of his white linen shirt? Naruto removed his wolfskin coat and opened his double-layered tunic. The cold immediately seeped into his skin, but he didn't care. With surprising strength, he managed to tear off a chunk of linen from his shirt. He quickly closed his tunic and his coat before busying himself with the torn-out rag. How to cut it in a rectangular shape? Anyone got something sharp enough for me to cut this into a shape? Yeah. Micus answered, and Naruto could almost see in the starlight what he was doing. Micus put his hand over the buckle of his belt and fumbled for a moment. He finally retrieved something small and shiny. It was a very small blade. Can never be too careful, right? Micus commented, and Naruto smiled before accepting the thin and fragile object. He busied himself with carefully cutting out a precise shape. It took many minutes to do it the way he was taught to do. He just hoped it would work. In his entire career, he had never heard of an explosive tag made out of a cloth. It seemed so common sense to use paper back then, and it wasn't hard to obtain a few empty scrolls. Heck, a single scroll was cheaper than a bowl of ramen. Sadly, this wasn't a world where paper was common. There was the papyrus Minis had absently mentioned a few times, when he told Naruto that city folk used them to keep track of their numbers. It was evidently too expensive for villagers like Naruto. Absently, he wondered if he could use the same seal on some other material such as a stone tablet or a wooden log. He might try that sometime. Provided he had enough chakra. We need some ink. We don't have any ink, Micus answered. He stayed silent for a moment, before adding, but does it matter what ink you have to use? Ah. Naruto's eyes widened. I can use my blood. He was just about to bite his thumb, but stopped and thought. He then faced the others and explained, it's going to be dangerous and difficult. The seal for the explosive tag is specific, and it might have too little energy if I make any mistake. I also need to channel my chakra while I'm drawing the seal, so you have to channel your energy, or whatever, into me while I'm doing it. Both his friends made their way through the darkness and headed towards Naruto, who was poised to bite his thumb and draw the necessary seal. Naruto only hoped whatever Micus and Oboro was doing would be safe enough for the ritual. There were plenty of stories of overconfident ninjas blowing themselves up by botching up the seal. It didn't help that it was almost pitch black in the room. The night was in full swing, and the moon only revealed a tiny sliver of itself, far too little light for Naruto to see what he was drawing. He would have to rely on his memory to succeed, something he was not very comfortable with considering his skill in fine arts. He could barely draw a stick figure. Oboro, you first. A second later, Naruto could feel a large palm resting on his head. He could feel another hand placing itself on top of Oboro's. We're ready. What now? Naruto asked, genuinely clueless of what to do next. You have to. Micus wandered off. Oboro, since you're a formed, I think you have a better idea of what Naruto should do. It took a few seconds, but Oboro's heavy voice spoke out in the darkness. Micus and I just have to imagine a stream of energy flowing out of our hands. At least, that's what Timos always said when he did it himself back in the army. What else did Timos say about the receiver? Micus asked. He told me, his master always said he willed the energy he received from the top of his head to enter his core. I'm sorry, I don't know what else he said about it. Don't worry about it, Oboro. Naruto, do you know enough? I don't. But I'll try anyway. This was the critical moment. If he botched up, he might potentially blow himself and his friends up. If it didn't work, they'd simply be stuck instead, unable to do anything to prevent the coming disaster. Gathering his focus, Naruto concentrated on the task ahead. First, he imagined how he managed to release the tiny slivers of chakra that were essential to the Rasengan. He took that image, and imagined the two hands above his head doing something similar, releasing strands of chakra through their fingertips. Nothing happened. Naruto expected that. It seemed that the chakra in his own coils needed to spin before he could accept his friend's chakra. Without another word, he brought the surface of his thumb to his teeth and bit a thin slice away. It hurt, more than any other time, but he held back his cry. Without missing a beat, he brought his bleeding thumb down on the surface of the linen and hoped it wouldn't smudge too much. He purposely made a smaller hole on his thumb than usual to compensate for the absorbing nature of the piece of cloth. For a single minute, Naruto was in a trance. The moment his thumb hit the cloth, a massive surge began to run from his head, all the way down to his chakra coils. The sensation was a lot like drinking a hot bowl of ramen water. A torrent of surging hot energy channeled in his being, energizing his coils and providing more than enough chakra to complete his tag. He was actually afraid he was draining far too much. The gasps and groans of both Micus and Ovro were getting louder. How much of their energy were they actually giving to Naruto? And was it dangerous to them? Naruto feared that the ritual was beginning to get lethal, so he labored to finish his tag as fast as possible. The moment he made the last stroke, he pushed the hands off. The palms resisted. They're not letting go. I'm done, let go. We can't. Naruto's core kept draining his friend's energy to life-threatening levels. Without being able to pull the hands off his head, the panicking blonde changed tack and acted on instinct. Naruto concentrated as he willed his coils to reverse the spin and turn around the direction of the flow. With a rending push, he flushed his coils and pushed his own chakra to discharge from the top of his head and back through the palms of his friends. A mighty flicker of blue flashed the darkness of the cell, and both hands knocked away in a violent discharge. Both receivers cried out as they thumped against the floor. It hurts. Ovro whimpered, who was rolling on the floor, clutching his arm. You can say that again, echoed Micus, who was lying prone on the cold stone floor. He could barely speak any further. I feel something warm, something hot and burning. Naruto quickly went over to Ovro and put his hand over his friend's forehead. It feels hot. What's wrong with you? He struggled to speak. I feel like my stomach is burning, but it's not my stomach. It's my core, I think. I don't know what's going on, but I don't think you're supposed to. Ovro coughed violently before continuing. It's not right. The energy is all wrong. It doesn't mix with my metal-formed core. Naruto looked concerned as Ovro seemed more and more in pain. Wait, it's going over some kind of peak. The pain. It's receding. Will you be fine, pal? Yes. I think the pain is gone. I just feel kind of bloated, but I'm okay. Go check on Micus. He did what Ovro said and went over Micus. He hesitated to touch Micus' forehead, but did anyway. A disgusting feeling welled inside of him when he touched the scarred tissue. You're burning up. I know. But Micus didn't roll or move. He simply lay there. I don't really feel anything. It's like I have my hand in a fire, but you don't feel the pain. Do you understand? I don't. Don't worry. It's just that I feel so much. So much more than I have ever experienced before. It's not quite something painful, but rather. Micus spread his arms on the freezing floor. I feel good, as if I have discovered an entirely new taste. Like taking your first bite of cake, you know? The two continued to breathe weakly. Ovro was still in pain, but it turned more dulling after a few minutes. Micus was in some kind of ecstasy, and didn't respond to anything for 10 minutes. It took a good half-hour for them to recover from Naruto's violent expulsion of chakra into their system. When Naruto finally asked how they were doing, he received two intriguing answers. I feel bigger, Ovro replied. Micus smiled eerily in the faint light as he gave his own answer. I feel at home. They were tired, as well as hungry, but they would be able to stay awake long enough for the solos. When Naruto assured himself that his friends were okay, he took the newly made explosive tag and carefully placed it on the top of the block that housed the cell door's lock. He ushered his friends towards the opposite corner, as far away from the explosive as possible. Gathering the remnants of his chakra, Naruto prepared to do another academy-level jutsu. Exploding tag. Release. Boom! Only a tiny release of chakra was needed to spark the explosive reserve. The linen strip instantly exploded, and the entire room was immediately engulfed in smoke and rubble as the entire cell door blasted apart. Rock fragments pelted the trio as they huddled back against the corner. The burning smoke smothered their breaths as they coughed. When the explosion finally ended, the three sighed in relief. The smoke was rapidly leaking away from the opening that acted as a window. When the air cleared, they could see the cell door had been blasted apart from its hinges. They were free. It worked! Naruto yelled, but Micus immediately hushed him. Quiet! He hissed, as everyone instantly tensed to hear if anyone was approaching. The constable's office was right next to the village leader's office, part of Royo's estate. While it wasn't placed right next to the Great Hall where most of the festivities took place, there were plenty of homes nearby where children or elderly people might have heard the explosion. Naruto feverishly hoped that the sound was muffled enough for them to disregard the odd sound. When the sound didn't alarm anyone, they cautiously left the cell and retrieved their equipment in the room beyond. As Micus buckled up his scabbard, he started to explain his plan. Here's what we're going to do, Naruto. You retrieve your bow and arrows from your room in Enna's house while we go to our own homes to retrieve some more stuff. We'll meet at the south road of the village since that's the most likely direction a raiding party of Velks will come from. Don't stray too far to the west, or you'll get spotted by the people hanging out just outside the Great Hall. Do the both of you understand? Both Naruto and Ovro nodded in understanding. Let's go then. We have a village to save. Naruto kept to the shadows and took the most isolated paths to reach Minnie's house. Once or twice, he thought he was being watched, or that a shadow was tailing him. Every time he stopped to scan his surroundings, he couldn't sense any people about. The streets were empty. The villagers of Oimos always prided themselves on their toughness, so it was unlikely they would drag themselves back from the Great Hall early to crash in their beds. He quickly reached the house where he had been staying for the past year and a half and wordlessly entered inside. He didn't need to light a lantern as he made his way to his room. It was all familiar to him by now. He opened his closet and retrieved the short bow Yaris forced him to buy. It was 1.5 times as long as his arm and as cheap as it seemed. Though it didn't pack as much punch as Yaris' composite bow, it was deadly well beyond Naruto's throwing range. That was all he needed. He carefully strapped the weapon across his back, before retrieving a quiver full of arrows and slung it over his back. The next object Naruto was looking for was his forehead guard. He quickly found one of the last things he had left of his old world and tied it on his head. I'm a Konoha ninja again. As Naruto was searching for his spare shuriken, a voice called out behind him. And what do you think you are doing? Naruto immediately drew his kunai and turned around to face whoever had found him out. Before he could finish his turn, a strong hand grasped his shoulder and pushed his entire body against his closet, pinning him down. Calm down, the old voice whispered firmly. It's me, Minis. How? Naruto asked, wondering how he had been found out when he stayed so close to the shadows. It was easy. Minis' relief, his familiar voice calming Naruto. I and the other elders agreed to station ourselves to the four corners of the central village. I happened to be near Royo's estate, and when I heard something loud and saw the smoke coming out of your cell, it didn't take much to deduce something serious had happened. It was child's play following you back to our home, so that was why Naruto felt ill at ease. It wasn't just the wind. Even an old git like me knows a few tricks. Sorry, Naruto said, feeling glum that he wasn't as good as he thought. I don't know how you busted yourself out. Naruto immediately tensed. Was Minis going to ask for his past? I don't care if you don't want to explain. I know you, Naruto. You have been a gift to Minisa and I. We have never seen a more honest and cheerful spirit in our lives. It was a joy to take care of you and bring you back up on your feet. Minis finally let go of Naruto. The boy relaxed. Besides, Minis added, if your friends are willing to trust you after whatever you've done, then I'm willing to extend my trust to you as well. Thanks, old man. And Naruto gave him his biggest smile. There was so much of the third Hokage in this man. He was truly lucky to end up in this old wizened man's care. We're not finished yet. Minis began to adopt a more serious tone. None of us have spotted any attack as of yet, but the festival will last until dawn. That is when the tired villagers all gather in the central plaza. It would be easy for a band of raiders to charge themselves in the mass and swing their weapons around to devastating effect. So we have to make sure we spot them in time and delay the raiders long enough for the others to grab their own weapons. Tell me where we have to be and we'll do it, Minis. Good. You meet up with your friends and position yourself to the southeast of the village. Akrasa should be near the lone tree there. When you approach, she'll ask for a password. It's order and chaos. Don't forget it, or she might not trust you. Okay. I'll be right on it. The boy quickly grabbed his stuff and ran out of the room. Minis could hear Naruto's footsteps slowing to a crawl as he once again made his way to his meeting spot in a stealthy fashion. Mini stayed behind and thought over the situation. All he could hope for was that Naruto and his friends were wrong. However, all signs pointed out that it was wishful thinking. The Velks didn't care who they attacked, but they usually didn't venture this far south. The only reason why he took Naruto seriously was because the Brown weren't below using mercenaries to attack Octos without taking the blame. Hiring Velks to raid the Octos coast was an effective prelude to the open war the Brown were surely craving. With the Octos armies busy chasing elusive raiders and the fleet pressured to spread itself thin, the Brown triremes could easily punch through and establish a strategic beachhead. It was a nightmare scenario that seemed more and more likely to happen the more Minis thought about it. More than ever he felt powerless. Regardless of whether he and the boys could manage to repel a raid and save Oimos, many more villages were likely to be at risk during the solos. The Brown worshipped the same pantheon as the Octos. They just had different names for them. The Mulads had their own pagan set of gods, but the Octos' day of solos was coincidentally a holy day for the Mulad horse god. The heretic Velks worshipped no god but their own, and they definitely did not celebrate anything during solos. However, since the Velks were but a distant threat, a dangerous complacency had spread amongst people like royals. The elders, all war veterans, had a better notion of the strange and heretical ways of foreigners. Royals and the other civilians, who have never fought against other nations, did not have a clue how low barbarians could stoop. It was up to the elders to once again take up their old task as the guardians of old and the protectors of peace. Without powers this time, the wait was long. Naruto was freezing as he was waiting behind the slanted roof of one of the sturdy houses. The laughter and music from the great hall was even louder in the open air. Not that he particularly enjoyed mixing with the rather narrow-minded villagers, but he started to miss the days when he didn't have to worry about being killed. When the eager ninja ran to the gathering point, he quickly regretted forgetting to fill his stomach before he left. Luckily, Micus foresaw Naruto's forgetfulness and handed him a string of tough sausages and a flask of cold water. Micus had come packing. He still wore the same leather armor, but left his cloak behind. A ridiculous-looking but effective metal cap protected his head, while a small bronze shield was strapped behind his back. In addition to his bronze sword, he also carried 3 short spears, to throw or to wield in melee combat. The most surprising sight was Ovro. His chest was covered in scales of bronze. It made a lot of noise whenever he moved but offered a lot of protection. He carried his one-handed sword as well as a larger bastard sword. He could easily wield the heavy blade with both of his hands, but he had some trouble carrying it one-handed. It was what he currently held that had attracted their attention. The thing was a complicated contraption made out of wood. It looked like a horizontal shortbow, with some kind of big box holding which evidently held back the bolt, as Ovro called it. It's a Karanian crossbow. Timos has a specimen somewhere back in his shack. I just got curious and copied the design one day, but that thing's wood, not metal. What do you know about woodworking? Micus pointed out. Nothing. And Ovro gave them a toothy smile. I hope this thing doesn't break down on me. Just don't point that thing at us. Micus finished. After the 3 had met up, they carefully approached the hiding place where Akrasa was keeping sentry. When they gave the correct password, Akrasa accepted them immediately. She quickly sent them somewhere behind her, and instructed them to stay out of sight. She would warn them should the Velk approach. It had been hours of waiting for Naruto, as he leaned behind the edge of the snow and hay-covered roof. His bow was ready in his hand, unstrung but ready to be used when the alarm was given. The bright array of stars shone softly at his face. Beyond the edge of the roof was the moon, which was a very thin crescent at this time. There was just enough light to be able to navigate towards a safe landing somewhere along the cliffs. It was also bright enough to climb up the cliffs, if the invaders chose not to use any torches. It would be easy to find the village from that position. The great hall rumbled with hearty voices and inspiring songs, oblivious to the danger of their festivities. As the dawn neared, the hall quieted somewhat, as if the party-goers instinctively knew it was time to sober up. The peasants started to sing the final song that would mark the end of the past solos. Naruto was a bit too far to distinguish any words, but the melody moved him. At the end of the song, when Solaris was freed from his chains and vanquished his brother Shiamon, a great shout thundered outwards as each and every villager cheered for the sun god. The large twin doors of the massive hall opened and the villagers began to stream out, led by an elaborately robed priest. The line was unruly, as most of the people were drunk and sleepy. The Solos was as much of a drinking party as it was a religious occasion. Naruto had no idea how it came to be that way. Hundreds of people made their way to the plaza east of the village and directly in front of the temple. It was not very close to Naruto's hiding spot, but if any of them were particularly observant, they would easily be able to spot Naruto hiding on the roof. Realizing the danger, Naruto quickly covered himself under snow to hide himself better. He hoped it would work. When the entire procession reached the plaza, the priest stood on a raised platform. Directly behind him was the exact angle where the sun was supposed to rise. The climax of the celebration would soon be at hand. As the first red-orange rays of dawn touched the faces of the drunks, they cheered. The priest began to chant traditional verses while the audience waited. Which element would Solaris bless this newborn year? Naruto continued to stare at the mass of villagers. He could spot Yara standing somewhere behind. Royos, of course, had the front seat. He wasn't sure, but he thought he could recognize the silky brown locks of Lysis standing somewhere close to her grandfather. When the circle of the sun almost left the horizon, the people held their breath. Naruto held his breath. This was his second solos. The first time, he was so sleepy that he half missed the flash. Before he knew it, the people were cheering and Naruto was looking all around him in a clueless fashion. He didn't want to miss the important event again, even if the barbarians were poised to charge against him at any moment. The circle finally parted with the horizon. In one flash of a second, the orange sun flashed red. It took a second for the crowd to comprehend, but they began to cheer at their loudest. Solaris had proclaimed this year in honor of Violas of the Heart. Life was the dominant element for the year. Naruto could see that Lysis was practically ecstatic. She was a strong life formed, so that was typical. However, the cheers of the others, though loud, were not as enthusiastic. They all knew that Life Guardians could do nothing to prevent an invasion, even when their element was dominant. Life Guardians simply didn't have any offensive powers besides a few charms and body manipulation. If the year was dedicated to any other god, then that god's guardians were capable of incredible acts powerful enough to protect the entire Federation's coast. Not so with Violas. It was a disaster for the Octos. A strange sound ran over the cheering. It was low, deep, and strong. The villagers all stopped cheering and looked at each other in drunken stupor. It was when a loud crack of thunder everyone began to panic. Naruto immediately turned around from the village to look outward. His stomach dropped. Scores and scores of Velks were charging up the road. A burning black mess was all that was left of Across's hiding spot. It was obvious what had happened. Acrossa. How the hell could the Velk call upon a lightning bolt at the clear of dawn? Anger began to surge in Naruto's eyes. Elder Acrossa had warned them all of the Velk's approach with her horn, right when everyone, including himself, was distracted by the end of the solos. The fearsome Velks replied by using an unknown jutsu to fry her alive. Determined to avenge her sacrifice, Naruto climbed up the roof, shrugging off the snow that hit him. He braced his feet firmly against the surface of the roof and began to draw his bow. He waited for them to come into range. It didn't do any good to waste any arrows beforehand. When the first wave passed an invisible marker, Naruto let loose his carefully aimed shot. 60 to 70 paces away, a Velk dropped in his steps, never to stand up again as an arrow was buried in his face. With a series of trained motions, Naruto rapidly took another arrow from his quiver and drew his bow again. He took only a tiny moment to aim before he let his arrow go with another thwack. His next target bled from the wound in his shoulder. The apprentice hunter was already at his next arrow by then, as he didn't bother to see if his arrows hit their mark or not. The only thing in his mind was to empty his quiver as fast as possible before the entire horde had reached the village. Twack! The third arrow dug itself harmlessly in a Velk's shield. Twack! This time a leg was hit. Twack! A miss! Twack! 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 Naruto continued to fire his arrows. He could hear the distant twin of Ovro's crossbow. His bolts hit harder, but the rate of fire was slower. Another archer joined Naruto in pelting the thinning Velks. This one was faster, and much more accurate. It might be one of the elders, but it was probably Yaris. The arrow fire slowed the Velk's mad charge as the enemy scrambled for their large round shields. By the time they all managed to strap on their shields, Naruto and the other marksmen had already downed 15 Velks. That still left about 30 to 40 more. However, Naruto slowed his rate of fire. It was pointless to waste his arrows against the enemy's shields. Still, he had to keep them pinned down behind their shields to slow them down. It was all a tactic to buy the villagers more time to get a hold of themselves. He didn't expect too much help. Most of the villagers had no military training at all, and were more likely to harm themselves than the seasoned Velks they would face. There were only a few who knew how to hold themselves in battle. Royos, for all his elderly pomp, had been an accomplished duelist in his prime. Timos, the master blacksmith, used to be a weapons master in the Octo's army. Even Hastos the butcher had some skill with his cleaver. By the time the Velks were 20 paces away from Naruto's position, most of the villagers who could fight had arrived, rallied by minis and Anissa. Swords, spears, pitchforks and hatchets faced battleaxes and broadswords. When the barbarians were 10 paces away, the lead warrior began to yell something Naruto was already familiar with. Velk Magar! The other Velks echoed their leader and bellowed Velk Magar as they began to charge through the thin line of villagers. They were an unstoppable force. Dozens of heavy stinking men ran up the low hill and crashed their shields against the waiting defenders. Only a few managed to keep their feet against the impossible mass. The mad berserkers continued to run forward and let the slower Velks who followed right after them trample the remaining defenders. The attackers weren't going to stop and fight. They were charging straight inside the village. Damn! If they spread out, they could easily kill many more before the men could manage to catch them all. When the Velks passed the road beside the house Naruto was standing on, the boy abandoned his bow and began to throw out his shuriken against the unprotected backs of the Velks' heads. The ninja's aim was true, and most of his victims dropped wordlessly to the ground. Some of the Octos gaped against Naruto's incredible feat, but they were quickly occupied by the rest of the Velks. More villagers arrived to block the road. They could do little to stop the Velks' incredible momentum as the main group continued to ram themselves towards the temple where a large group of women and children had taken refuge. Shit! If I can't manage to stop them, then all those civilians will die. Naruto jumped from the roof to the ground and began to run after the huge brutes. However, before he could take another step, another crack sounded out. Naruto quickly turned towards the direction of the noise and saw Micah struggling against some sort of giant black wolf-like creature. He had to help his friend. Turning back to assist, Naruto dropped his bow and brought out his kunai. He could see Micah barely dodge the barreling wolf as the lanky boy jumped. Even though Naruto was sure Micah managed to get away in time, somehow he cried in pain as he clutched his arm. When Naruto got closer, he could see that his friend's clothes were seared away by a green slimy substance, which Micah painfully tried to rub away. Unfortunately, it left him wide open for the grotesquely slimy wolf's charge. Twing! A bolt suddenly flew forward, almost piercing the wolf's neck. The creature barely managed to dodge in time, leaving it unharmed, but forcing it to falter in its attack. Ovro charged together with Naruto, while Micah was holding the creature back with his spear. When Ovro reached the creature, he began a mighty swing with his bastard sword. Fool! Naruto thought. He's making himself wide open. The wolf-like beast divided swiftly under Ovro's clumsy swing and swiped the boy's leg with his claw, immediately drawing blood. The large boy screamed and dropped to his knees. Naruto divided ahead and guarded Ovro's vulnerable back. The wolf bared its large and crude teeth. Slime continually dripped off its fur, burning away the snow below like acid. For the first time in a very long while, Naruto felt fear inside of his heart. There he stood, with nothing but a kunai. Ovro was groaning from the pain in his leg while Micah was still rubbing off the burning slime from his arm. The slime could kill him. His kunai was woefully short. He was more likely to harm himself than the wolf because of the disgusting creature's acid. Unable to attack, Naruto stood his ground and stared at the beast. The wolf growled menacingly. It would not be long before it would pounce on him. If only I had something with a longer reach. Just wishing his kunai longer didn't work. Naruto shook himself and focused on the slimy wolf. which was carefully stalking forward. Strong yellow eyes stared into Naruto's own. When the wolf started to crouch, Naruto knew the time was imminent. It was just when the creature's jaw touched the snow that Naruto received a flash of memory. Naruto on top of Gamabunta. Henge the giant toad into Kyuubi to take advantage of its claws and teeth. Naruto's mind worked in overdrive. He didn't really know if the illusion would be real enough to work, but the wolf was just about to jump, so he had no time. He quickly moved his hands into the required seals and pictured his desired result. Dog. The wolf-like beast stretched his paws against the surface and propelled himself straight at the blonde's annoying head. Boar. The beast was confident he would have the delicious head in its jaws. If not, then it will likely barrel his slimming body against the boy and would burn the flesh from his bones. Reverse ram. Transformation jutsu. The wolf's sight was obscured by a strange cloud. When the creature almost reached the boy's position, it was sharply repelled by a very hard thump on its chest. Pain unimaginable burned in its chest. Naruto spun his newly transformed staff before letting go of the transformation, letting it turn into a kunai again. The transformation jutsu only provided limited lethality. The sharp edges wouldn't be sharp enough due to the imperfection of the projected image. Nevertheless, Naruto could still provide enough chakra to transform his kunai into a blunt staff and hold its shape long enough to make a single attack. Micas! Naruto yelled as he looked back at his recovering friend. One of Micas' arms was red and bare against the cold air, but at least all the slime got off. His other arm was clutching a spear. Micas prepared his throwing stance. He took 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps before hurling the lengthy projectile in true athlete fashion. The stunned wolf never even saw the missile before it buried itself straight through its left shoulder. Yes. Ovro. The hefty young man recovered from his leg wound and limped over the wounded beast. He held his heavy sword with both hands. The wolf, suffering from its wounds, knew Ovro was coming to finish it. It weakly stood up and bared its teeth against the approaching boy, who faltered. Come on! Ovro hesitated for a small second, before remembering what the foul creature had done with his leg. With a mighty roar, he brought down the blade in a heavy chop. Thanks, he missed. The damned boy missed, again. Naruto yelled while approaching the pair to help out. Ovro managed to bring his sword back up in time to slash the wolf when it tried to take the advantage. A thin line of blood marred in the animal's ugly face as it mixed with the slime. When Naruto reached Ovro, he managed to pry away his weapon. Naruto lifted the heavy blade and made a very wide swing as he pushed forward. The blade dug itself in the neck, and momentum pushed it deeper within the beast's neck. The wolf beast howled horribly as its breath was quickly cut off by Ovro's blade. Naruto dug it deeper and deeper as the wolf's slime started to melt the iron away. Blood was seeping out of the open cut like a flood, rapidly spreading in the slime and turning the creature's skin into a greenish-red tint. The creature let out a horrible series of racks and gurgles as its lifeblood continued to seep away into the snow. Finally, the wolf was dead. Naruto dropped the now useless weapon and backed off, still afraid of catching some of the lethal green slime. Sorry about your sword. Naruto apologized. By taking Ovro's weapon from his hands, Naruto had taken over what Ovro was supposed to do, as if he thought that Ovro wasn't competent. It's fine, Ovro replied, breathing heavily but rather unconcerned. My legs are still hurting. Micas managed to limp over the 3, looking winded himself. His sword was drawn out its scabbard. Use the snow to soak up the slime and rub it away. Good idea. Ovro nodded, and began to do just that. As the trio caught their breath, a loud and feminine scream rippled the air. That's Lysis. She's in trouble, Ovro exclaimed. Surprisingly, Micas didn't seem concerned. Let her get taken away by the Velks as a prize. No, don't you see, Micas? Ovro despaired. She's probably hiding inside the temple with the others. If the Velks had managed to reach Lysis, then the other women and children would be in danger. Then what do you suggest we do? Save them. All right. Let's go. Micas relented. But he interrupted and pointed at Ovro's leg and his own arm. We're not going to be fast enough to reach the Velks in time. Naruto. The boy in question nodded and gripped his kunai tighter. I know. I'll run ahead while you guys catch up, okay? Good luck. Micas wished, though Naruto was partially taken aback by the glint in his tone. Was Micah sincere? Go, Naruto! Save them, okay! He yelled, and began to run back towards the village while the two boys were limping behind. Grr! They didn't notice the corpse of the beast they had just slain morphing into another shape. The slime disappeared while the color turned lighter. Its paws grew shorter while its tail grew thicker, the head grew fatter, the ears flattened against its body. Hairs began to recede and the skin began to toughen. In a few long seconds the shape grew vastly more bloated. What used to be a slimy wolf was now a massive maggot-like creature with a hardened exterior. It turned its sickly blackened eyeballs towards the smoking village. Before it turned away and burrowed straight down the frozen soil. The soft earth might as well not be there. Nygars effortlessly tunneled the solid rocks of the great mountains of Velk. His bones were creaking as he and the other defenders struggled to catch up with the rampaging Velks. Royos was an old but successful man. He had thrived despite the poverty following the aftermath of the devastating Mulad incursions. Combining his quick reflexes with a sharp wit, he slowly earned enough to carve out a small trading company. Managing all those caravans and trading galleys required constant attention. Each day became a grind, dulling Royo's aging spirit. The First Bronze War devastated half of his shipping fleet, and Royos knew it was time for him to step aside to make room for his prodigious son. Corvus was a worthy successor, having benefited from the finest academia and the most expensive tutors. Though sonless, one of his daughters would doubtlessly marry a high noble worthy of his built-up stature. Life seemed good on the surface. Royals knew better, though, how fragile that peace really was. His many shady dealings in the capital left him weary and vulnerable, constantly aware of the huge risks he was taking in an effort of securing that peace. It wasn't hard to find a quiet village, far away from the bustling intrigues of Cape Indus, that would welcome his capable leadership. If not, his sizable wealth and clout was enough to convince the most skeptical. Oimos was soon graced by a sizable villa and supporting services, providing plenty of jobs to the rather simple village. For 10 years since Royos had arrived, the village enjoyed a small boom. Its population grew by a fifth as Royos cleared back the forest to make room for more farming lands. Second sons and third sons suddenly had the choice to lease a patch of land instead of being resigned to break their backs in mines or risk themselves on fishing boats. His plans had all gone well so far. He needed only a few more years for his goal to come into fruition and ensure the safety of his family. Peace was hard to grasp, however, and the gods seemed to remind him of the danger of complacency. As soon as the Elder's horn made itself known, Royos wished his fears were unfounded. He hesitated, as had everyone else. Surely the elders weren't serious? There was not a single reason why Oimos was in danger. The Mulads were never a problem since they were terrified of the sea. The Karanians were more interested in trade than conquest. The Bronze Imperium was kept in check by Octo's formidable fleet and its contingent of guardians. Even if some of Bronze's threats were capable of slipping past the net, Royos had carefully obtained guarantees that none would inflict suffering. The idea that Velks would come all the way from their polar wastes to raise his village was preposterous. The northern barbarians never strayed so far south. Their primitive boats couldn't handle the currents. Everyone knew that the Velks were nothing but bloodthirsty primitives. It should have been impossible for them to be able to build ships sturdy enough to cross the Northeast Sea. It would have been even more impossible for them to go down to the wild and stormy waters of the Octos Sea to the Karamat Sea. Royos didn't know how these Velks ever managed to evade the blockade stretching from the Indus to the island trees. It should have been impossible, unless they had help. The only enemies of Octos that were sophisticated enough to deal such a stroke were the Brond. Were they actually inciting war? It was all crazy to Royos. When a massive lightning bolt tore the sky to the south of the village, Royos finally realized it was serious. The entire host of villagers all screamed and ran in every direction. Every sense of rationality evaporated as they fled. The first thing Royos did was grasp his village leader medallion. He crushed his fist so hard that the ruby-like crystal in the center of the circle broke under the pressure. A massive warmth flowed through him, but he knew he only had seconds to get across his message. Oimos. Raid. Attack. Velk. Danger. Too many. And then he was cut off. Without wasting another second, Royals wordlessly gestured at his friend Miklin. The constable was already up on his feet to calm the panicking villagers. Get to the temple and barricade yourselves there. Don't run towards your houses. You will only make it easier for the invaders to slay you. The whole plaza was in a state of panic, but fortunately there were a few who were level-headed enough to keep calm. Some had managed to organize some of the defenseless villagers to take refuge in the temple. The priest was at the entrance, calming each woman and child as they passed through. When Royals gazed at the few men who had gathered around him, he noted with a dreaded heart that there were far too few to stop a typical Velk raiding party. If only he had listened to that foreigner Naruto and his misfit friends. How could he be so blind to discount their warnings? Royals shook his thoughts. It was no use to wish the past to change. All he could do was salvage the situation and hope that the village would survive. He looked at the few determined men and said, "Get your weapons and head to the south road of the village. We have to help the elders who are probably holding the Velks off right now." They immediately scattered and went to their houses to pick up their gear. Royals was about to do the same when he spotted a beautiful brown-haired girl heading to the south armed with nothing but a staff. "Lysis!" he yelled frantically, and easily caught up with the girl to grab her wrist. "Let go of me, grandfather. I have to help," Lysis shouted as she tried to pry her arm away from his iron grip. "I'm informed, for Valia's sake. I've been trained for this in academia." Anger surged in Royals. "This is no time for stupidity, young lady. This is real war, not some fancy guardian story like the songs." His granddaughter continued to struggle. A small part of him surged in pride at the sight of her bravery, but a larger part despaired at her headlong charge into death. He could never forgive himself if he returned one of his son's daughters in an urn. "You're not even an informed," Royals yelled in her face, letting loose all reservations he meticulously maintained over the years. "Even if you were an informed, you know as well as I do that life, even in the year of Valias, can do nothing to harm another directly. Just give up this foolish impulse and listen to your grandfather. Get to the temple and protect the people there. Protect your sister. Be like your father, Lysis." The young woman looked sullen, but eventually she relented. "I'm sorry. I will do what you say." She turned around, flourishing her hair into the wind, and left for the temple. With his little Lysis safe, Royals had one more thing to do. He left for his mansion to retrieve his dueling sword. The Velks will never reach her. The Songs of the Fox, Scroll of the First Wind. The North Road on the morning. Naruto was all out of shuriken and left his bow behind in the dirt. He only had 2 kunai remaining in his arsenal. At first sight, it seemed ridiculous that a young man could square off against sword and axe-wielding barbarians twice his size and weight. However, the fearsome warriors have never faced the nimble ninja of the elemental countries. Even without any weapons, Naruto's taijutsu was not to be underestimated. When he reached the outer edge of the village, Naruto converged on a stray Valk who was amusing himself by torturing one of the villagers who had turned up to defend. Naruto only vaguely recognized the agonizing man as the miller. A discarded mace lay beside him, together with the separated arm that used to hold the old weapon. When the laughing brute kicked against the open wound of the half-conscious victim, Naruto couldn't keep his temper restrained. He sprinted through the blood-soaked snow and threw his kunai straight at the elk's head. The kunai neatly lodged itself in the massive man's mouth and pierced the other side of his skull. Naruto was already at the corpse before it began to tip over and ripped his kunai off. Already his mind was on his next target. He charged straight in the middle of a fight between a group of Velks and townsmen. Naruto jumped and attempted a flying kick at the most dangerous-looking attacker, only to bounce off a hastily raised shield. His opponent was a particularly brutal-looking menace, and goaded Naruto by banging his axe against his shield. Naruto circled him for a moment before catching an opening. He swiftly charged again and threw a hastily rolled snowball at the man. The barbarian yelped in surprise as his vision was momentarily blinded, but swung his axe in all directions to close any vulnerabilities. Naruto wasn't deterred. He jumped against the wall and ran a short distance against the surface before landing back behind his blinded opponent. The Velk could hear Naruto's boots crushing against the snow behind him, but he was too slow to prevent a knife-like weapon from sticking through his thick neck. Wrenching his kunai free, Naruto ran further up the road towards the temple. Everywhere around him, the raiders were laughing and roaring as they brutally massacred the defenders and the defenseless. Only the toughest villagers were able to force them into a stalemate. Old war veterans like Timos the blacksmith or Rallos the cooper seemed to manage well enough with their teamwork. The elders were also acquitted themselves well, despite their age. Strong men like Hastos the butcher and Grilles the lumberjack were capable of defeating the Velks, but struggled to keep themselves from getting hurt in the process. As the village began to wake up from its drunken lull, more had come to stave off the Velks' incessant push towards the temple. It was no use. By the time Naruto squirmed his way to the central square, the temple's door was already bashed aside. Several of the remaining Velks were battling men in the plaza, but there were plenty who had forced their way in. A desperate help brushed against Naruto's ears, and he immediately turned to the direction of the sound. It was Royos, barely able to hold off a rampaging brute. He stabbed his thin sword repeatedly at the big warrior, but only managed to scrape the laughing warrior's shield. The warrior menacingly swung his axe around, pushing the old man back until he was rapidly running out of room. It was clear that he needed help. "Hey! Pick on someone your own age, you stinking ape!" Naruto called out, and ran towards the brute. He dodged a savage chop that was meant to split him in two and rolled to the left. He finished his roll by shooting out his foot, cracking it against the man's shin. The huge Velk yelled in pain, but swept his shield in the direction of Naruto, hitting the boy's head with the sharp edge. Ack! Naruto was forced back and landed on his thigh in the snow. He rubbed his bruise, keeping an eye on his opponent who had all but forgotten he was fighting Royos. The village leader took his chance and lunged at the Velk, who managed to turn around in time and slap aside the thin needle-like blade with the flat of his axe. Before Royos could pull back, the Velk slapped his shield against the old man's jaw, spilling blood as the leader fell back into the snow. "Hey! You're my opponent now!" Naruto yelled, and jumped forward to slide across the flattened snow to tackle the Velk. The warrior surprisingly fell down on him. Naruto struggled to get the sweating man off him, and finally managed to pry his arm loose to stab the Velk in the side of his neck. The man made a wordless cry before blood seeped through his mouth. Naruto struggled to get the heavy corpse off him, but finally the weight slipped off. He was standing face to face with Royos. Anger rose up inside him as he remembered the man's foolishness. "It's your fault this is happening. If you only listened to our warnings, don't you think I know that?" Royos replied, exposing the stress and despair that had racked him since the start of the raid. "This isn't the time for petty revenge. You have to get in there and help the women." He pointed at the ruined doorway of the temple. "You have to save my granddaughter." "There's no time, foreigner. Don't call me a foreigner," Naruto growled, baring his teeth against the old man. "I have every right to be treated with respect unlike you." The village leader simply looked down, unwilling to face the young boy who had tried so much and had already done so much. "I apologize. I have made a grievous mistake in ignoring the omen you brought to my attention. But just this once. Help." Silence followed, but eventually Naruto turned around. "I'm not doing it for you." With that, he crossed the bloodied and corpse-ridden plaza. He avoided the lumbering Velks, who were busy fighting other villagers. Men were falling left and right. 3 to 6 villagers died for every Velk they managed to kill. The horrific warriors of the north truly lived up to their notorious reputation. As much as Naruto would have liked to help, there was no way he had enough chakra to form a single shadow clone. He felt horrible being forced to leave those brave and desperate men behind. When Naruto entered the double doors of the temple, he tried not to get enraptured by the rich scenery inside. Statues of each of the 8 gods lined the walls, surrounded by the magnificent murals that sung the song of creation in their opulent depictions. Solaris of the sun, born out of the nothingness of the ether. Shiamon of the shadows, who followed and hated his brother's creation. Violos of the heart, for hate was contrasted by love. Marikron of the earth, as love formed in a physical manifestation. Larukos of the skies, for the lands long for the freedom above. Morokos of the seas, to restrict freedom in a cage. Noravan of the forests, to turn the cage into a paradise. Bakranas of the sword, for paradise was worth fighting for. In his few visits to the temple, Naruto could never stop staring at those magnificent works of art. He only managed to shake off the spell when he noticed that the statue of Violas was drenched in blood. A Velk had hacked off the heads of a pair of women, and was quickly gaining on their terrified children. Naruto sprung into action, hopping over the long marble benches before jumping high in the air. His kunai was raised high as he descended. The walk was too busy running his sword through the body of a child to notice Naruto. When Naruto's kunai finally dug in the Velk's shoulder, an earth-shattering cry exploded from the man as he spun his entire body. Naruto couldn't wrench his blade deeper in the flesh and was shrugged away by the Velk's might bulk. He fell on the floor. The warrior was still in pain, but had his eyes on Naruto. He stomped on his boots where Naruto's body was lying. Naruto skillfully rolled away, simultaneously throwing kunai at his opponent. Velk's eyes widened as he looked down at his chest. It was already bleeding profusely. Naruto drew his spare kunai and walked over. The dying man looked back at Naruto in shock. He slit the barbarian's neck. Probably one of the younger ones. The others aren't going to be so easy. Aya! He heard the same mind-piercing scream as the one he heard before outside when he retrieved his kunai. Get away from my baby sister! It was Lysis! Naruto swept his gaze to the other side of the temple, to see the slim girl holding off one of the biggest Velk Naruto had seen. The girl was beautiful in her flowing white robe, her dazzling white cloak that swirled in the air as she moved. Her silky brown hair was tied in a loose ponytail that seemed to sparkle in the flickering light. She wasn't totally harmless. Her face was set in a determination Naruto had often seen in the faces of his fellow ninja friends. Her small but firm hands held a sturdy staff, which she used to block and parry the giant Velk's battle axe, not without a measure of success. The giant was tall and bristling with muscle. He was covered in thick layers of menacing fur, with only a pair of metallic blue bracers to protect his forearms. The Velk wore a giant belt with a buckler of gold, and shaped like some kind of wolf. On his head was a dull iron helmet with a pronounced nose guard. His axe seemed too large and too heavy to be wielded in one hand, but the Velk somehow managed to swing it like a toy. His other arm carried a shield, not the large round ones like the rest, but rather a smaller rectangular one. The four corners held deliberately sharpened edges. Velk Magger, stuff your Velk Magger somewhere else and don't come any closer, you hairy beast. Lysis hollered back as she raised her staff with both of her hands to block the giant Bell's two-handed chop. Surprisingly, the staff didn't break, but the force was too much for the girl's knees, and she promptly collapsed. Shit, Naruto thought, and raced towards the other side of the temple to save the girl in time. The barbarian howled as he crashed his axe down in a chop that would have surely split open the brunette's skull. Surprisingly, the girl smirked, and shot out one of the ends of her staff straight against the man's shield, providing her with enough impulse to roll away immediately. The man growled in frustration as his chops sunk into the floor, jamming his axe between the cracks of the floor. Lysis wasted no time and shot out her staff yet again. This time the warrior blocked the strike with his shield, temporarily stunning the girl with the sudden impact. The man took advantage and immediately bashed the lower end of his shield against Lysis' head, who cried out in pain and jerked back. Instead of wasting time with his axe, the Velk unsheathed an elaborately runed and engraved sword and stepped forward to finish his pesky opponent. Before he could take another step, he suddenly turned around and parried Naruto's sneak attack. Damn! How did he know I was just about to stab his back? The Velk roared a mindless cry and stormed straight at Naruto, who was forced to backpedal while trying not to get his head chopped off. He dodged when he could, and parried when he couldn't. Each time he blocked one of the chops and slashes, he felt his arms would break or rip. He cried each time the man's entire weight crashed on his weapon. I can't keep this up. Naruto eventually crashed against one of the children who were hiding behind a corner. What are you doing here, kids? Get out of the way! He yelled. But it was too late as the Velk grinned cruelly as he slashed one of the fleeing little girls. The tiny thing cried as she flew down on the floor and crashed against its surface. Naruto gaped as the Velk mercilessly stomped his boot on the girl's back, crushing it. Sandris! Lysis yelled, and quickly ran towards the downed girl. No! Naruto yelled as his temper grew. How could this man enjoy killing a defenseless girl? He couldn't let anyone else get killed. You! Naruto yelled as he stormed straight at the Velk, who was surprised by the fierceness of his skinny opponent. The Velk reacted quickly and blocked the kunai aimed at the head. Naruto smirked as the Velk did what he had expected him to do. He continued to propel himself as his kunai pushed harder against the sword, using it as a pivot for his next move. The sudden rotational momentum made it possible for Naruto to jump off the ground and kick both his feet against the Velk's chest. They smacked in a powerful impact that was sure to break the ribs of a regular person. The Velk cried out in pain, but quickly shot out his shield against his midair opponent. Naruto cleverly grabbed onto the wooden object, and for a moment, hung on the brute's arm. He quickly went to work and dug his kunai in the man's shield arm and soon carved its way along the arm. The Velk screamed out and bashed Naruto's head with his own, but not before Naruto managed to cut off the leather straps holding the shield aloft. The Velk roared again as he clutched his arm. Naruto had run his kunai through his forearm deep enough to ravage several tendrils of muscle. In pure rage and malice, the wounded warrior kicked the disoriented boy hard, cracking his boots straight against Naruto's stomach and propelling him 10 paces away. Ack! He gasped as he landed hard on his back, blood spurting out of his teeth. He was in so much pain from his aching ribs and his bruised stomach. The absence of Kyuubi's healing factor made it all the more painful for him. He scrambled to pick himself up, expecting his enraged opponent to stomp towards him and attack him while he was down. Instead, the massive brute looked towards the sky and raised his damaged and bleeding arm towards the ceiling. He opened his jaws as he shouted in his own language, "Amon Esili Orthos!" Crack! A powerful stream of lightning tore through the heavy stone roof, dropping rubble all around the Velk, who was howling in laughter. His eyes seemed to go wild as his arm, hit by the stream of pure light, began to absorb the energies. The huge current rapidly fizzled out, but by then deadly circular jets of lightning encased the Velk's arm. To Naruto's eyes it seemed like a Raikiri had enveloped the man's entire arm, breaking down the flesh and turning it into pure lightning energy. Bleeding eyes met Naruto's own. The Velk lowered himself on all fours. His lightning fist cracked the surface of the ruptured stone floor as stray bolts of electricity leaked from his arm. Darn, how am I supposed to fight off a massive Velk with a sword and a lightning arm? Without warning, the man barreled over towards Naruto's position, howling as he went. When he was close enough, he jumped with his lightning arm raised to strike. Naruto had no doubt he wouldn't survive a direct hit and scampered on his feet. He was just barely able to roll away from the mad Velk's dive. The Velk continued to barrel down and crashed his fist against the stone floor, rupturing it and cracking all kinds of lightning around the point of impact. Naruto continued to hop away but was far too slow to escape the rapidly expanding circle of death. He cried as he was momentarily electrocuted. The boy could feel himself being cooked alive. It was mercifully over soon, but the experience had made its mark on Naruto. He limped around and stared at the hunching warrior. His eyes didn't even seem to be in focus. Sweat poured from his face as the beast warrior tensed. His arm crackled brighter and seemingly grew larger until a giant hammer-like fist emerged. It then took a deep breath and bellowed a phrase that sent chills in Naruto's spine. Makoan Herkrath. One moment the thing was well away from Naruto. The next warrior was suddenly beside him with the hammer-like lightning fist descending on him. Naruto tensed for a tiny second before reacting out of fear and instinct. He shouldered himself against the chest of the Velk and rolled against the furred surface. He ducked underneath the sword arm and narrowly evaded electrocution. The massive thing lumbered on but quickly turned around as Naruto limped away to distance himself. Naruto was breathing hard as the pain continued to rack him further. Every single bump against his ribs increased his agony. The Velk brandished his huge fist and lumbered again towards his prey. The boy knew he had to do something else than evade. He couldn't manage to keep this up much longer. Boldly he poisoned his body in a stance. He let the Velk come down upon him. As soon as the beast was in range, Naruto spun himself and lashed out a kick. It made a solid hit at the Velk's face and Naruto smiled when he felt teeth lodging themselves loose. Unfortunately, Naruto didn't manage to land quite right, and the swirling mad Velk swung his fist an inch away from Naruto's chest. The distance was close enough that many small bolts of lightning entered Naruto's body. Naruto felt he was being cooked again as he thumped hard on the floor. He meekly tried to roll away, but he was too slow and wounded to evade the Velk's boot crashing on his head. Naruto's mind ringed as blood seeped out from his mouth. He looked up to see the warrior raising his sword to the sky, ready to bring it down. Before the Velk could bring it down, however, it glowed. The Velk looked up to his own weapon in confusion as it grew brighter and brighter. What's happening? Hiya, the Velk began, but his astonishment was suddenly cut off as the sword exploded, the shards mercilessly pelting his arm and face. The Velk immediately jumped back as he tried to sweep away the fragments, only to press them further into his flesh. Naruto! He heard, and Naruto immediately turned around towards the entrance where Mikus and Ovro stood ready. Naruto's eyes widened as he saw Ovro with his eyes closed and his hands glowing. Eventually, the drain was too great, and Ovro collapsed, painting on the floor. Did he just? Naruto! Mikus yelled, "Get out of the way, you're blocking my view!" Naruto complied and moved aside. He stared at Mikus, who was gathering something deep inside of him, and thus spoke hella close. Both his fists began to catch fire. To enjoy is to suffer. He continued, calling up parts of the Song of Wrath from his memory. His fists began to burn brighter, turning into great balls of fire. He finally opened his eyes and aimed his arms at the downed Velk, his lightning arm already starting to dissipate. To suffer is to burn. A great whoosh of flame tore from Mikus' fists and lanced into a spike of flame. The fire lance blasted and enveloped the great warrior, his rapidly cooking body running mindlessly before crashing against the temple's wall. Naruto couldn't believe his eyes. How could someone like Mikus, who was just an unformed, call upon enough energy to do a Chunin equivalent technique? And was Ovro responsible for breaking the warrior's sword? Ugly face! A voice called out. Naruto looked back to see Lysis in the corner of the temple, huddled with a few other young survivors. In her arm was the little girl the Velk had slashed to death. She had despaired over her sister, but witnessed the impossible feats by the two village boys. Her mind worked quickly, even in her grief. How could you be uninformed? Mikus' visibility flinched at the snapping tone. And you, blacksmith boy, weren't you just a weak-formed? You wouldn't be stuck in this village in the first place if you had any inkling of power. So how the hell did you two suddenly become informed? Yeah, Naruto echoed, barely able to comprehend the display of power himself. You two barely came out alive from the fight with the wolf. How did you two get so strong? It's you, Ovro enthusiastically replied. We don't know for sure, but it's definitely something from you. It's your core, your energy. It changed us. Huh? Mikus stepped forward to explain, keeping his voice down to prevent others from listening in. When we gave you a part of our energy to bust us out of jail, you mixed it with your own chakra. When you eventually returned our energy, we somehow got some of your chakra or whatever in ourselves. Remember how Ovro was in pain and I was having a burning sensation? Naruto nodded, slowly getting the picture. You informed us, Naruto. It's incredible. We just unlocked our powers when we were fighting through some of the Velks on the main road. You have no idea how special you are. Both Ovro and Mikus made an honoring gesture with their arms. Never has one informed another since the earliest days of the Pterodon Empire, when Solaris himself descended from the sky to touch the first of the Guardians. But I'm nothing special. I'm not a god, Naruto said desperately. The worshipping look on Ovro's face was disconcerting. I don't even know a lot about this Solaris dude. It's probably just a coincidence. It's not a coincidence. We haven't manifested any powers on our sixth. If we were, then we would have been training in one of those fancy academies in Cape Industry. Then, Lysis interrupted the boys, who had snuck up right behind them. You two just became rogues. Mikus scowled while Ovro looked down. Naruto had heard about the rogues. The villagers feared them, and they had good reason. When children reached their sixth summer in their lives, they were tested by the guardians to see if they were informed. When an informed was identified, the parents had an obligation to give the child up to the prince. He would place the children in an academy of informed, where they would be trained relentlessly until they achieved the high standards required to become guardians. Most of the time, the parents cooperated. It was considered an omen of great fortune to have guardians in your family line. The generous allowance that came after also didn't hurt. There have been attempts to pair up formed and informed to increase the likelihood of their offspring having any powers. But whatever it was that made people informed didn't pass down in the family. There were plenty of rituals which claimed to bestow the attention of a god to a young child. Some were small affairs, such as drawing a circle and placing a few candles before kneeling down in prayer. Other rituals were more bombastic and extravagant, such as throwing in an elaborate celebration or dunking a baby's body in a tub filled with the tears of elegant puers. Despite the disappointing results, the wealthy continued to throw their coin away. The gods paid no attention, and bestowed their blessing onto both rich and poor in a seemingly intractable pattern. What was important was that all informed had to surrender to the state and take up its shackles. Sometimes the gift came upon the children of questionable parents. Sometimes the parents loved their child far too much to give them up. Sometimes it was just an orphan who had no idea that they were informed. Whatever the reason, they were not under the control of the state. Guardian training was strict and required the utmost dedication, and it was for a good reason, as untrained informed could easily lose control over their powers. They also had a tendency to use their infantile powers for their own personal gain, which was why there was an instant death sentence on any rogue informed older than 8. Lysis looked stressfully at the lifeless body in her hand, before sharpening her eyes to pierce Naruto with her gaze. She calmly stood up and carried the girl towards Naruto, who was barely staying conscious from all of his wounds. While Lysis was limping, Michelin, Royals and Minis entered the temple. They were shocked at the devastation inside, but lowered their weapons when they saw there was no Velk alive. When Royals saw the little body of his youngest granddaughter, he choked and collapsed on his tired knees. Little Sandris, Michelin simply swept his gaze over every Velk corpse, ending at the one that had been burned crisp. He then told the ones inside, "What's left of the men who can stand are sweeping the village for any stragglers. It's still not safe outside, so stay in the temple." He then swept his gaze towards his exhausted son, anger flaring in his eyes. "Micus, you've done it now. You'd better," he started, but was suddenly cut off by his son. "Shut up, father! I know I'm a rogue, and guess what? I like it. Unlike you, I'm strong now." Almost everyone inside shuddered at Micah's outburst, including Naruto. He had never imagined his friend's relationship with his father was so bad. It was also unnerving how he casually alerted the adults to the fact that he was a rogue. "So what are you going to do now?" Micah asked rhetorically, holding a twisted smile. "Are you going to arrest me and execute me? Or hand me over to the guardians so they can find out how an 18-year-old turned informed? If you come with me peacefully, then I'm sure the guardians will be generous. You're not a rogue yet until you do something criminal, son. Shut up. I'm definitely not going to let you have your way, and I won't let those guardians take me away. I've heard the stories of how they torture and dissect the rogues they capture, to find their cores and experiment on it. I won't let that happen to me. Listen to your father's words, boy." Minis interjected. "The guardians serve to protect. You are special. Your place is with them." "Shut up, you decrepit elder. I can't believe you would give up your powers so that fat pig up in the Tower of the Indus can call up a storm whenever he likes it." They continued to argue amongst themselves as Naruto looked on. Before he could catch what they were saying next, he saw Lysis arriving in front of him. His face grimaced as he saw Lysis laying the bloodied corpse of her sister on the floor. She then straightened herself up and faced Naruto with firm eyes. He already suspected her request. "Give me your chakras, or whatever it's called. If those two losers can become informed, then so can I." "No," Naruto replied with uncertainty. He had no idea what the effects would be on a strong formed like Lysis. Furthermore, he didn't want to interfere more than he already had to. It felt wrong to give the obnoxious and arrogant girl what she wanted. "I don't care. Turn me into a rogue," she commanded, conjuring a small amount of allure as she leaned forward to entice Naruto with her eyes. When she didn't receive a response, the determined girl approached Naruto and grabbed his shoulders. She shook him around, desperation evident in her demeanor. "Just give me the strength to bring back my sister, damn it!" "No!" Naruto yelled, and he could hear everyone else stopping their conversations to stare at the two. "Naruto!" Ovro called, and started to limp towards him with Micus following just behind with an enraged face. "Don't touch him!" Lysis turned Naruto around and brought her arm around his neck, choking the weary boy. He was far too weak and surprised to kick her off. Stop! He managed to cry out, but the girl continued to squeeze tighter. She dragged him over to Sandra's corpse and pushed his head down a few inches away from the toddler's closed eyes. "I can bring her back alive," she whispered with a broken voice. "With the help of your chakras. You can help save a life. Just give me the power," she whispered, and Naruto felt his heart curl. He looked at the bloodied face, feeling helpless at the sight of yet another casualty of war. The little girl was innocent to the fate she had been given, and powerless to stop it. She wasn't a threat to anyone, and yet a bloodthirsty Velk had cut her down to satisfy his own bloodlust. The world was cruel. "Oh, okay," he finally said. Lysis immediately let him go, and went back to Sandra's body. She held out a palm against the body's chest. "Do it now! Give me your strength!" she hissed. "What are you doing, Lysis? Stop at once!" Royos yelled. "I would do anything for her, even if it means living out the rest of my life as a rogue." Minis yelled out, "Don't! Listen to your grandfather, girl." "Naruto, don't do it!" Naruto heard their voices, but he didn't listen. If giving Lysis power would save an innocent life, then he would do it. He knelt behind Lysis, grabbed her free arm to put her hand over his head. "Give me your energy. I heard you've done it before, that you're trained to act as a battery for life guardians. Do it to me," Naruto commanded, closing his eyes to prepare himself for the inevitable struggle. "What? Why?" Lysis asked. "You're supposed to give your energy to me." "No, it doesn't work like that. You have to give me your energy first to let me mix it up with my chakra, before I give it back to you. If you're lying, just do it." He could feel Lysis' hand grasping the top of his head with more conviction. It felt different from the last time. He could already feel the spark of her core. Then it hit him. Ugh! He lurched as he felt a veritable torrent of pure and hot life energy flow through his head. The flush of heat poured into his chakra coils, which eagerly absorbed it in its starved flesh. His coils had never felt so full in a very long time, not even when the combined energies of Overo and Micus entered his system. The sensation was different as well. There was less chaos and less incompatibility. There was only one type of energy from only one person now, and it mixed with his chakra much more fluently. Lysis was pouring out so much energy that she started to breathe erratically. Naruto grew concerned. He was pulling out so much energy that he might kill her if it continued, but he didn't know what to do. He wasn't nearly reaching his limit, but he had already received a Chunin's worth of chakra. Oh gods! She's got as much energy as 4 overs in me, and she's pouring out even more. There's too much energy, and it's overwhelming my chakra. It's weakening me. Breaking me. I have to get rid of the excess. Somehow, the idea of dumping it all back into Lysis didn't quite sound very appealing. Back when he'd returned the energies of Overo and Micus, he consumed a large chunk of them by drawing the explosive tag seal. He just needed to drain his energy again. Naruto brought his hands forward and prepared a heavily draining jutsu, Shadow Clone Jutsu. Instantly several poofs appeared around him. When the smoke emerged, 10 copies of Naruto revealed themselves. The entire temple was stunned, from Royals and Minis to Overo and Micus. Even the straining Lysis took note. This is impossible. A shadow power, but different. Minis let out. Naruto didn't listen to the ensuing discussion. He did what he needed to do, and felt the mix of energy and chakra turn stable. There was only one thing left to do. He imagined himself spinning the 2 streams of energy around each other. When he felt the spin was sufficient, he willed the flow the reverse. His coils obeyed immediately. The effects was staggering. The drain was so enormous that he was instantly forced to let go of his clones. Naruto felt a huge suction on his head as the energy slammed through his skull and entered Lysis' system. She shrieked terribly, but was rapidly cut off when the last bits of her energy left his system. He promptly collapsed on the floor, feeling utterly exhausted. Naruto! Overo closed in on him to feel if he was still conscious. He was. Everyone turned to stare at Lysis. Yes. I feel it coursing in me, warming in me, she said, more to herself than to others. I can feel it. She smiled. I can feel Violas beating in my heart. Lysis quickly grabbed her sister's body and hugged it to herself. Her beautiful voice spoke out. He touched the fallen. She began to quote from another ancient psalm. And cried, "Give me back my son. Give me a spark of life." A single point of light emerged. The center grew rapidly, blinding Naruto and the others in the temple. He felt the ball of light expanding through his body and beyond. His body quickly became engulfed in the waves of light, each volley softening the bruises of his body. It felt completely different from Sakura or Tsunade's healing techniques. For a single moment, he imagined riding a wave of bliss, but the sensation left his body fast. The energies dissipated, weakening the light until there was nothing left. Naruto looked at himself in wonder. He felt somewhat better, but still exhausted. Still, it was a relief. Even Kyuubi couldn't heal him so fast. "Mommy!" The tiny cry broke Naruto's distraction. He quickly turned his gaze to Lysis, who was crying in happiness. The little girl in her arms looked terrified, but hugged Lysis tight. "Sandris! You're alive! Thank you, Violas!" Naruto felt good as he saw how he helped save an innocent life. The two girls were happily cuddling each other as they cried. The sight brought some painful memories back to him. Not everyone has a loved one. Royals quickly reached the girls and embraced them both, crying with them. When Minis reached Naruto, he simply shook his head. "You've made a horrible mistake." "I know," Naruto replied, for once not caring for the old man's opinions. He wasn't oblivious to the consequences of his decision, but he felt that it was worth it as he saw little Sandris laugh. "No, you don't." Minis spoke, trying to impart the seriousness of the situation on his charge. "You created 3 teenage rogues. If the Guardians aren't going to capture you and force you to make more, the Praetorians will quickly get word and capture you themselves." Shrugging, Naruto began to think a little more. While he grew accustomed to Ormos, in the end, it wasn't his home. However, the others might think otherwise. "I'll have to run." "Yes. The new rogues are bad enough, but you, Naruto, are worth enough to start a war over." Naruto's eyes widened. "You don't think the Brand will actually declare a war just over me?" The elder's eyes glazed. "Frankly, they'll use any excuse to declare war. But when word gets out, and it will get out, they will do anything to get their hands on you. The ability to create informed can shake the very balance of power in Eastern Pterodon." Minis sighed and asked, "Do you know how many informed the Octos and Brand have?" "No. But they're very rare, right?" "Yes, Naruto, and that makes them extremely valuable. Last I heard, the Octos have about 200 trained guardians while the Brand have a little over 300 Praetorians. When you consider that both countries have millions of inhabitants, those amounts seem minuscule." "Wow, indeed." Minis nodded. "Then imagine this. If you can make at least 3 informed a day, as you've done today, you can quickly double the amount of informed of a country in just 3 to 4 months. The side that manages to obtain this advantage will almost certainly win the coming war, no matter how many troops they field against those new informed. That means..." Naruto trailed off. He hadn't considered his own worth when he informed Lysis in front of everyone. He should have been more aware of the politics and powers in this world. Still, there was something else going on. "Minis," Naruto started. "Why aren't you saying I should help the Octos out? After all, it's your country, is it not?" "But is it your country?" Minis shook his head. "Remember, the Octos Federation and the Brand Imperium were once part of a single nation. The Pterodon Empire." Naruto furrowed his brow. The history of the lands, while fascinating, didn't catch much of his interest in the years he had stayed in this world. "The name of this continent?" "Yes, because the Pterodon Empire once ruled the entire known lands." The ignorant boy widened his eyes as he remembered. At its zenith, the empire was at least 4 times larger than all the elemental countries combined. They had thousands of guardians back then. Minis continued. "If either Octos or Brand manages to obtain that much informed, then they would surely feel obliged to reforge the old empire. A war of immense proportions would be unleashed upon the world. Whole countries will fall as they are unable to field as many informed as the growing empire's forces. So what you're saying is that I'm going to be hunted? Naruto had never imagined he would ever leave the village. It seemed so far away, but it was just yesterday that he was just a simple villager. He was now one of the most powerful tools of war, able to engulf the entire continent into war. I have to run, it is for the best. Many said. Royos has already used his Amul to alert Cape Indus, and their wind guardians should already be on their way here. You only have an hour of time left to gather all your belongings and flee. Naruto looked shocked and distraught. So little time? It'll be alright. Micus added. Me and Ovro are hunted too, so we'll keep you company. It won't be so bad. Ovro nodded, and managed a small smile. Yeah. We don't have anything left in this village anyway. You're everything to us now, Naruto. Thanks, friends. And Naruto matched Ovro's smile. I guess I will go pack my stuff. Yes, we are better. The scarred boy replied, and the three of them started their way to the exits. Naruto managed just a few steps before a hand on his shoulder stopped him. What did Minis want now? I'll go back to our home and pack your bags for you, Mini said. He then gestured at Royos and his granddaughters. Naruto understood and nodded. I'll take care of it. We'll meet at the edge of the village on the north road. Be sure to meet us there, Micah said, already forming a plan in his mind. Naruto nodded. The two separated and Naruto slowly made his way over to the rejoicing family. Lysis. She stopped smiling at Sandris and turned to scowl at Naruto. What is it? Ovro, Micus and I are leaving the village. Naruto hesitated for a moment before continuing. It's best you come with us. Lysis' scowl deepened. Your loser friends might be rogues, but I'm Lysis, daughter of Corvus, and life assistant in training. I'm sure Cape Indus will accept me with open arms. Her scowl turned into a grin. Especially if I bring a guardian creator like you to them. Anger surged within him. You ungrateful bitch. You could at least thank me for allowing you to save your sister. Don't talk to me like that, you foul-mouthed lowlife. I can talk to you any way I like. You don't deserve better, you rotten-hearted cow. Naruto's tone made Lysis flinch, but she didn't stop glaring at him. I should have never given you those powers. It's only for your sister's sake that I did it. He barely restrained killing her on the spot. Lysis continued to glare as Sandris looked confused. Royals saw the direness of the situation and quickly intervened. Boy, please calm down. Forgive Lysis for her rudeness. Humph. Naruto refused to acknowledge any apologies, and it didn't seem like the smug-looking girl would grant him any. He really didn't feel like entertaining Lysis. The village leader ignored Naruto's dismissal and continued. Many have seen your bravery against the Velks, and have witnessed you slaying many of them. You and your friends were right in warning us, and we have been wrong in ignoring you all. Royals looked genuinely remorseful. If it were not for you three, we would have been taken by surprise. I sincerely doubt we could have managed to survive against those odds. And for preventing that nightmare, I thank you. Royals stood up and approached Naruto. The village suffered many casualties. I can't estimate the damage, but I am sure at least a fourth of the villagers will not survive this day. He paused for a moment, guilt evident in his eyes. This is devastating. What's worse, I have a suspicion we're not the only village affected. He turned to look at the statue of Solaris. It's too convenient for them to show up and attack us on the Solos. The Velks have never ventured this far south until now. If they're here, it's probably part of something big. What I mean to say is that it will not be safe here anymore, regardless of who you are. This conflict has been brewing for many years now. He looked regretfully at his granddaughters. I don't think you can do anything to convince my granddaughter to come. Lysis wanted to bring up a complaint, but Royals sharply cut her off with a gesture. I'll arrange something for her myself. I have connections. It'll be fine. Fine, old man. Naruto finished, and turned to leave the temple. Just make sure she won't give me any trouble. I promise. Royals finished, but quickly added, I will meet you at the edge of the north road just outside the village. I have something to give you then, don't take too long. Naruto replied, and walked out of the temple. The death and destruction was even worse outside. Numerous corpses of Velks were strewn around the plaza, but there were far more bodies of the villagers. The snow was soaked deep in red. Naruto felt immense sadness at the loss. Oimo's was never going to be the same. As Naruto made his way through the streets, he could see numerous family members crying out their hearts. Many brothers and sisters, husbands and wives have been lost. There were some who stared up to Naruto in awe as he passed them by. It was much different from their usual neutral or detesting looks, and Naruto felt disconcerted. He was so used to being hated, reviled or disliked. The looks of adulation made him feel worse, actually. He felt that he had failed them somehow, and didn't deserve their respect. He was early at the designated meeting spot, and had plenty of time to wait. He leaned back against the tree and looked back at the village. To think that he would never see this village again. It had been his home for 1.5 years. He had dreamed of staying here his entire life, but his hopes were dashed now. His powers were too dangerous to the world. Only by running away would he avoid destroying the balance of power in this region. I wonder where I have to go. I don't have to keep running away for my entire life, do I? I'm sure the others have an idea where it's safe. It took a good half hour before the others came. Ovro arrived first. He was rid of his cumbersome scaled armor, preferring warm furs and leather for the journey ahead. Naruto noticed that the boy had a different sword on his hip. It was a long sword, sheathed in an iron scabbard. On his back was a rolled-up blanket on top of a large sturdy sack bulging with what Naruto thought had plenty of tools in it. At Naruto's raised eyebrow, Ovro laughed nervously and replied, "Master Timos gave me all of this stuff. He said he once traveled all around Toriden with much of the same equipment. Can you carry it all?" "I think so." "Do you know he even gave me one of his personal swords?" Ovro moved his hip, letting Naruto have a closer look at his sword. It's a long sword made of Cressonian iron. The craftsmanship on this weapon is incredible. Micus arrived not long after, looking radically different from before. He had left his helmet, his shield and his black leather armor behind, preferring to be clothed in wolf-skin clothing and a grayish cloak with an oversized hood. On his hip was the same brown short sword he used earlier. On his back was another rolled-up blanket, just on top of a half-empty sack. "I brought the usual stuff. I don't have anything else to bring with me." The last to arrive were elders Minas and Minissa, Yaris and Royos. Minas strapped Naruto's back with a long white hooded cloak that could easily keep him warm on all sides. He then strapped Naruto's pack and put it over the boy's shoulders. Minis then helped tie the blanket that would keep him warm for many nights on top of his sack. He finally put some of Naruto's extra shuriken in the back pouch. "What did you put into my sack?" Naruto asked, curious why it felt so big yet reasonably light. The elders smiled, and Minis answered, "There's the usual gear such as some flint and tinder, as well as your skinning knife. We know you can make some extra clothes, but we packed you with some extra summer clothes. They're merchant bought, so they should fetch you a decent price on some markets if needed." Minissa smiled gently as she spoke. "There's also some durable food inside. I've packed a few vegetables, beans, biscuits and dried fish. I'm sure you can hunt enough meat for yourselves." "Oh," Minis added, "there's a container with my entire collection of maps rolled inside." Naruto widened his eyes. Minis had often told him that his papyrus maps were fairly old and extremely fragile. He never showed them to Naruto, preferring to rely on his memory and draw some highly inaccurate sketches instead. Thanks, old man." Naruto managed to let out, "It's nothing, and you'll need them, considering where you're going." "Elder Minis," Micah said respectfully, "where'd you reckon we'll be going?" "I'd thought we three would just be wandering around and find some place far away where people won't remember us." The adults each looked at each other. Royos finally answered, "We have been discussing that amongst ourselves. It's been decided that it's best for you kids to travel to the enclave of Tyros and seek sanctuary there." "What?" Ovro snapped in surprise. "But that's in the heart of the Brand Imperium. We'd never make it through their lands." The village leader clearly looked uncomfortable, but pressed on anyway. "I agree it is not the easiest of routes, but it is the only entity in all of Toriden that shelters rogues and can manage to protect them." The Enclave of Tyros was the last remains of the original Toriden Empire. Ages ago, as the empire crumbled apart, The remaining cadre of guardians loyal to the imperial throne had managed to subdue the riots in the capital and the rest of the island. In the ensuing chaos, the guardians of Tyros even managed to grab some territory on the mainland before being checked by guardians loyal to the pretender. A stalemate formed, which over time grew in a stable but uneasy peace. The enclave became a place of sanctuary and retreat. Its leaders were guardians instead of nobles or administrators, and kept the enclave safe by maintaining a strong defense and staying quiet to the outside world. These days, the enclave was more concerned with trade and scholarship than reclaiming its former glory. Where else do you think you boys can go? Minis questioned dubiously. Do you want to try your luck in the wild lands of Milad or Estair? They're too close to Octos and the Brown Imperium, and don't afford the same level of protection. The Delorian Plains are even worse, with the constant warfare between the cities and the mercenary armies. The southern empires of Phazar and Medais are hotbeds of slavery and thoroughly unpleasant for any white skin. Helosur and the other northern isles are constantly suffering the Velks, and they're sure to suspect you immediately. Only Paraso might be safe enough for you to disappear in, but you'd never make the journey. Well, Micus considered. What about the other isles? No. Minis shook his head. You're not seriously considering traveling over water? There are far too many patrols these days, so you better not risk it. Besides, the Khoranians kill anyone who doesn't look like them, while the Decranians will do the same, and eat your flesh as well. I've heard the countries on the Corcoran Isles were quite advanced, but they're on the other side of the continent, and it's no guarantee they're willing to capture and sell you all to gain favor. All right, Naruto added, having enough of all the foreign names. So we get to this enclave, which is in the middle of Praetorian country. But how do we ever reach it without getting captured? Whatever path you follow, make sure you're never to be found on any of the main roads. Minis explained, looking sternly at all three of them. You're better off traveling along the small rivers. You'll be taking the long road to the enclave, but they're not heavily patrolled, and it's easy to duck in the woods whenever there is trouble. Just make sure you avoid any settlements, no matter how small or poor. There's no telling if word of you three have reached that far. Do you understand? Yes. Naruto nodded, this time picking up all the information. Which rivers shall we follow? You can look in the maps, Minis replied, but continued. But I recommend you travel north, off the road, to the Indus River, and follow it west into Milad. As soon as you've entered Milad territory, and see the forest changing, head south and find the Concordia River. When you do, follow it west upstream. As soon as you reach the fork, well, it's a blind stretch, but watch the sky close and keep heading west to southwest. You'll reach the Flavianus River soon enough. Follow it south. It's a major stream in Malad and the northern regions of Brand, but it will eventually branch out so much that Flavianus Prime is nothing but a large creek. Follow it south until you reach the coast of Ora Bay. Keep south and hug the coast until you reach Enclave lands. Make sure you confirm it by asking any travelers on the road before you enter one of their port cities. I think I got it. Micus replied while Naruto bulged out his eyes. He barely remembered any of the names or directions. If he was taking the lead, they would have probably ended up in Deller. Yaris, Naruto's hunting master, stepped forward and gave Naruto a bow and a quiver of arrows. His eyes widened as he recognized Yaris' composite bow. Consider this your congratulations on becoming a journeyman, Naruto. I had planned a few months more to round up your apprenticeship, but you've handled yourself while shooting the Velks on the south road. But this is your prized bow. I've got a few other bows to keep the village fed. You need this more than I do, especially considering the dangers you're all facing in the roads ahead. Now, Naruto, be sure to keep the bow wrapped and dry with this. Yaris handed him a thick leather sack. Don't use it when it's raining or snowing. And be careful of the draw strength. Don't ever fire without your bracer, and start by shooting at half draw for the moment. Thanks master, I'll keep it in mind. Naruto eagerly wrapped the unstrung bow in the sack and slung it on his shoulder, together with his quiver. His back was pretty crowded now. One final thing before you go, Royo said, and came close. He rummaged something behind him and revealed a rather large and bulging pouch. Ovro gasped while Micah smirked. Naruto held out his hand, and Royos gently put the fat pouch in his hand. I don't know how much there's in there, but I reckon there's about 100 gold coins in there, with a few silvers on top. Now promise me," he said, closing his hand upon the pouch, slightly pressing down on Naruto's hand. "Don't waste it on needless luxuries. Live from the land as much as possible. Never show the ones you trade with your full pouch. If you listen to me and keep to these words, then you'd have more than plenty left to book yourself a ticket on a ferry on the way to Tyro's Island. I promise, Royos. I know this won't absolve me from my crime of neglect, but I hope it will make up for the respect I lost from you. It's fine. I've forgiven you. You were only doing what you thought was best for your village, and you came around when the village was attacked and helped defend it. Thank you." The three finally exchanged their last farewells to the adults, and began to travel along the North Road. They were optimistic, despite the tragedy that had struck Oimos. They would all soon become rogues, and word of their descriptions as well as the generous bounties on their heads would spread. Wind Guardians would patrol the skies, while Earth Guardians kept their ears close to the main roads. Forest Guardians would stalk the forests, while the Shadow Guardians lurked the night. The Life Guardians would keep their hearts out in every populated city, while the Water Guardians looked out upon the seas. In addition to the coming hunt, each of the three had their own reasons to leave the village. Ovro was tired of his uncaring parents and his lifeless master. There was always a yearning in himself to prove he wasn't useless. And now that he turned metal-informed, he felt he had his ultimate chance. He was unique. He was powerful. Mere blacksmithing wouldn't strain his capacity now. Metal-informed couldn't conjure the destructive spells of the other elements, but they were masters with the sword. No more clumsy moves. No more hesitating. He was confident he could beat Micus in a straight sword fight. He'd probably be able to beat any guardian except a trained metal guardian. With Micah's strategic mind and Naruto's resourcefulness, he was confident they wouldn't come across any opposition. Micus was filled with glee. Finally, he had an excuse to leave his father and this accursed village. He was disappointed in Naruto for giving that undeserving bitch Lysis more power. There were many other more deserving people who could be brought to life instead of that spoiled girl's sister. Still, at least he was leaving his hellhole of a home. He was a fire-informed now, a servant to the first of the gods and the most powerful of all. Sure, he couldn't fly like the Wind Guardians, or heal like the Life Guardians. He wasn't trained, so he doubted he'd survive a duel against another Fire Guardian. Considering his friends' complementing talents, he was confident they'd survive anything in their way. Naruto was the only one who would miss the village. It had reminded him of home, of Konoha, but without the beatings in his childhood. Like in Konoha, he had a few precious friends. He'd miss many sagely teachings, so reminiscent of the third Hokage. He'd miss Menissa's great cooking and her caring spirit. He'd miss the visits to Akros and Akrasa, always having stories to tell of their excursions into Mulad territory. The thought of Akrasa saddened him. She was a kind woman, and a precious companion to Akros. She was the one who gave the initial warning, who pulled them all out of the spell of the Solos. And she gave her life to defend the village for that. He would grieve for the many deaths. Unknown to the three, they would soon be followed. One to eat them, one to capture them, and one to seek help from them. It was the prelude to a lengthy song.